Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron Reigle.
And you know what, Cameron? I've said this before. I will say it again. It's no secret. My all-time favorite video game character is Diddy Kong. And it might be my age. It might be because, in my opinion, Diddy Kong is the best representation of the anxious millennial in all of gaming. But Diddy has always been my go-to character. Dixie Kong is a close second. I mean, they're almost equal, virtually tied. But Diddy, I think, is the heart and soul of the Donkey Kong series, and therefore is very, 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 very high in my esteem. So, doing an episode about Diddy Kong, which we've done here before on the Kongversation, obviously, but talking specifically about the evolution of Diddy Kong's design, where he started in 1994 versus where he is today, two things have kind of intertwined, have coincided to make this episode extraordinarily timely. And the first one was planned in advance because this is obviously the 30th anniversary year of the original Donkey Kong Country. And so I pitched this to you a couple of weeks back, Cameron. I said we should do one of these art episodes about Diddy Kong specifically because I'm in a reflective mood about everything that spun out, spilled out even, from Donkey Kong Country, the game that launched the Donkey Kong universe 30 years ago this November. But beyond that, and this wasn't planned, this was purely accidental, just a couple of days ago, we finally got a Diddy Kong Nintendo Switch profile icon, as Nintendo Switch Online offered up 7 Donkey Kong Country icons that are available until September 2nd. All you gotta do is load Donkey Kong Country on the Super NES player from Nintendo Switch Online, and you can, like, get out of it before the Rareware logo even finishes rendering, and you will have access to all 7 icons.
Yeah, I did exactly that, and it's the fastest I've ever quit playing DKC1.
I had to do it. So what happened was I was actually in the middle of making the Kongversation live for that night. And usually my Monday nights, like my work schedule on Mondays is extremely fragmented because I'm up editing late on Sunday night. So I can kind of consider that the start of my work week. And then so Monday I sleep in, and then I do a little bit of work in the afternoon, kind of dip my toes, handle anything like on the news side of things, maybe start planning out my week, do a little bit of video editing, but then I put everything aside at dinner time, and then I get back to it at 10 o'clock at night, which is when I make the Kongversation live. And so I was in the middle of doing that when this news broke. And sometimes I can let a news story go until the next morning. Like, just the other day, our friend and DK Vine patron Freezer pointed out to me there was a second Donkey Kong Senior / Donkey Kong Arcade / Young Cranky Kong profile icon available through Nintendo World Championships, NES edition, whatever. And I was just like, okay, well, that can wait till morning because it's not really that big of a deal. But we've been harping about the lack of a Diddy in specific Switch profile icon for, I mean, it's really picked up in the last year or two, but it's been a constant source of aggravation for 7 years. So I was like, well, I have to do a news article. So I was up even later than I anticipated on Monday night. And so I had to just like get into DKC really quick, activate the profile icons, and then buy each one with 10 platinum points apiece, which lucky for me, I hoard them for occasions such as this.
Yeah, it was one of those things that, like, just a victim of timing. Like, Tropical Freeze's Switch port came out long before they started doing these. So Well, so did Smash Ultimate, but it
Yeah.
just kind of became a like running gag between me and my friends of like what extremely niche characters would get an avatar before Diddy. Oh, but Boshi from Super Mario RPG got an avatar before Donkey Kong.
Chained Kong from Super Mario RPG, or maybe it was Gorilla, but yeah, still.
I love that there's a Boshi avatar. I'm like, please keep the deep cuts going, but
Yeah.
just so funny it took the second most important Donkey Kong character so long to have any representation in this.
I was going a bit daffy in my news articles about these because I've been diligently reporting on Switch profile icons since the Chained Kong one last autumn, and one of the running jokes is how much Cranky Kong was accruing by virtue of Donkey Kong Arcade icons going up. And I had just done one about 2 weeks ago when the first wave of the World Championship ones went up, where I said Cranky Kong now has 4 and Diddy Kong has 0. Granted, none of them were as Cranky Kong at the time, but you know what I mean. So anyway, 6 of the renders, or 6 of the icons are renders from the original Donkey Kong Country. We have Donkey Kong, we have Diddy, we have Cranky, Funky, Rambi, and Winky was the surprising one, I think, out of the bunch, because you would imagine it would be Squawks or Mamian Guard. But they went for Winky, which I appreciate. It's the deeper cut. It's the animal buddy who wouldn't stand a chance if they do this promotion with any later Donkey Kong game. So yeah, hell yeah, get Winky in there for sure. The King K. Rool one is a bit of a controversy, though, because they did not use a render from Donkey Kong Country. The render is actually from Donkey Kong 64. And my theory as to what happened there, I have a couple theories. One of them could just be Nintendo screwed up, because it's very easy to make that mistake if you don't have the renders properly classified like we do here at DK Vine. We're all about staring at renders.
Yeah, and K. Rool, but for between Donkey Kong Country and DK64 is one of the more static looking characters. If you take DKC 2 and 3 out of the fold.
Right. However, my theory is that Nintendo doesn't have all of the Donkey Kong Country renders on hand in actual decent enough resolution. Most of the Donkey Kong Country renders that are floating around, in fact, I would say a lot of the Rare renders from the 90s, most of them were swiped from Rare's own website, and the ones that weren't were magazine and player's guide scans with all of the various degradation that comes with scanning something from a printed page. So it's possible they did not get their hands on good quality K. Rool renders from Donkey Kong Country, like the one where he's holding his hand to his mouth and he's like, oh my. Or the one where he's staring.
That's the one I would have picked if the asset were available.
Yeah, or the one where he's staring, I think, to his right. But and then there's one where he's kind of got his fist up. He's like, come on, fight me. But if you like look at even our own gallery, they're kind of low quality, not the ones you would want to put as your Switch profile icons. So that's my theory as to what happened there. But it's still nice to have King K. Rool. I'm not complaining.
I will set my pedantry aside because it gets a K. Rool avatar at all.
For sure. So, the Diddy one, though, really dredged up some of the stuff we're going to be talking about on this episode, because that early Diddy render, the lack of nostrils. In the chat, Porygon Q makes a joke and says, Diddy Kong wasn't born with nostrils like the rest of us. He had to build them himself. Damn it. And, so the lack of nostrils, the kind of weird early ACM renders from Rare, you can't see his fingers, but he's got the very fragmented, segmented fingers.
Yeah, we'll get into it, but I feel like of all of the DKC 1 Kongs, Diddy is the most prominent one who changed a lot over the years and changed a lot very quickly. So it's very jarring for people to see how he looked in 1994 and realized, oh, he looked like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that Diddy actually went through a dramatic evolution in just a year's span, at least on promotional artwork. But it was like mentally more of a gradual shift. We'll get into all of that, but
and even with Donkey Kong, like, yeah, they immediately upgraded his model for DKC2, but that like look for DK kind of stuck around. Like, people got used to like furless orange DK from that like model, or one similar to it being used in Smash or Mario Kart, like showing up in promotional stuff for Nintendo because it was just around in the asset library for a long time.
Right. Yeah, that early Diddy, the lack of a Nintendo logo on his hat, it just, people, again, I've been saying this a lot recently, but if you were not around at the inception of Donkey Kong Country, it's kind of bewildering to go back and see the way Diddy once looked. But one thing that's really exciting talking about Diddy and the evolution of his design is how unique Diddy is as a character. Because how many characters can you say are developed by a Western studio, in this case, designed by Kev Bayless and Rare, and then fully adopted and embraced by Nintendo? Obviously, much of the Donkey Kong cast that has appeared since then has been, but Diddy's prominence among them, to the point where he is standing side by side with Mario cast members on things like, airports in Japan. They've got these murals of Nintendo characters welcoming you to Japan. And off on the side, it's, Donkey and Diddy next to all of these Mario characters, mostly designed by Miyamoto. So just how much Diddy has kind of clawed his way into the mainstream bubble of Nintendo. Not even just this ancillary, weird, Rare bubble that we inhabit at DK Vibe, but like outside of our purview, outside of our manic energy, Diddy thrives. And yeah, so I want to talk about all that. I want to talk about how this little monkey with the segmented sausage fingers went on to become a Nintendo icon. We're going to be talking about the evolution of Diddy's design. And yes, I know it's a fraught political time right now, and we're talking about a guy with a red hat and white text on it. But don't worry, this episode is Deal of the Art. We're taking back, all right? We're taking back the Kong's wardrobe one piece at a time. So it's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to it. Before we get into it, Cameron,
unfortunately, that wardrobe doesn't have any pants.
That's how we differentiate it, yeah. No baggy suit pants, just pantsless, no trousers. But we're talking about clothes, and I have to say, really quick, be sure to check out DK Vine's merchandise page on TeePublic. It's at dkvine.com/merchandise. We're going to have our 25th anniversary coming up on August 22nd. And we're going to be doing a special live episode in honor of that. But we're also going to be having our 25th anniversary shirt on sale then as well. So bookmark it. You want to celebrate a quarter century of DK Vine poisoning your mind with notions like prosthetic golfing fingers. So be sure, just get ready. Get ready. It's our quarter century extravaganza coming up. And if you want to keep DK Vine around for another 25 years so we can celebrate our 50th anniversary, be sure to back us on Patreon at dkvine.com/Patreon. And, we live stream most of these episodes for our $5 and up patrons. And I would just like to say hello right now. Got Me Muppet in the chat. We got the aforementioned Freezer and Porygon Q. We got March Rose calling me out, saying how long y'all think he's going to talk about prosthetic golfing fingers. It's going to come up. It's already come up. I've already said the words. They have left my lips. They will come up when we get to the appropriate era. But we're going to be talking about lots of things, Cameron. We're going to be talking about eye color. We're going to be talking about stars, how the Nintendo logo subtly shifts in the late 2000s. But first, I want to talk about the way Diddy looked before he was even Diddy Kong, when he was actually Donkey Kong Jr. This is one of the benefits of the once upon a time, the site known as Twitter, was creators from Donkey Kong Country and the greater DKU, currently and formerly working for Rare, which share stuff. You know, they would just blow our minds by uploading documents from the making of games. We would see Greg Mail's wild post-it notes, how he would construct levels, just, you know, lay it all out. We would see concept art, and one of the things shared were the early, I guess, pitches for what would become Donkey Kong Country. And we kind of learned a great deal about how Donkey Kong Country was devised, how they landed eventually upon the idea of the current Donkey Kong either being an aged up junior or a completely different character, depending on which side of that debate you fall on, but also, aging up the original Donkey Kong into the character of Cranky Kong. Because once upon a time, that wasn't going to be the case. Donkey Kong was just going to be Donkey Kong. They're going to introduce a older, grandfather character who eventually became the character of Cranky Kong. But the whole impetus for shifting the timeline up and aging up the characters was rooted in Rare's redesign of Donkey Kong Jr. And, I don't know, Cameron, this is mostly, full disclosure, this episode is mostly based on your vintage, and I can say vintage because they're a decade old at this point, your vintage DK Vine, your vintage DK Vine Tumblr post. Because you did a brilliant series on Tumblr. Man, Tumblr. I went to our Tumblr page today because I was swiping stuff wholesale from this. I think it was a 14 series feature, a 14-part feature you did on the design evolution of Diddy Kong. But now you have to log in. You have to have a Tumblr account to read Tumblr. And I'm just what the hell, Tumblr? But the whole internet.
Do some account maintenance and go through our account and dispute a bunch of adult content flags on this series because I guess Tumblr's AI crawlers think Diddy is some sort of weird genitalia.
Diddy doesn't wear pants. We've already established that, so I'm sure it'd raise some red flags. This anti-porn kick the whole internet's on now. So yeah, Diddy's too hot for computer monitors and your smartphones in this day and age, and it's a shame. But yeah, I had to log into Tumblr. I had to create an account basically because I didn't have my own Tumblr account. So anyway, but it's a brilliant series, and of course, it's a little out of date, given that a decade or so has passed since then. But we've updated it with irrelevant information now, or at least updated our notes for this episode. So, but I do recommend, if you have a Tumblr account, checking out the DK Vine Tumblr, because Cameron did some terrific stuff on there that's definitely worthy of your time if you have not. You can whittle away an entire afternoon and evening on there, so check it out. But yeah, this proto Diddy was actually Donkey Kong Jr. And so, Cameron, would you like to kind of kick us off, take the lead here? Since, after all, these are mostly your words.
Yeah, words I wrote forever ago, so they're even new to me. So, yeah, as Hyle said, Diddy Kong didn't always start out as Diddy Kong. They wanted to start off with the father-son pair of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., and some of this concept art is attributed to James Ryman, and he kind of started off as this, cute roly-poly gorilla. And, you know, these were concepts. They didn't stay that way for long. By the time that they made a sort of like, I don't want to say series Bible, but it was kind of this weird thing where Rare would make these like very high quality, like bound books for their game pitches.
Yeah.
That look like children's storybooks. And by the time they moved on to that stage, the Diddy we see in that book is pretty much a half step. He's a lot more svelte. He's like got the like egg-shaped body that Diddy Kong has. Like basically the key remnants of Junior are he's got a red tank top, but it does have a letter J on it. And his face is still drawn in the sort of like DK arcade style with the very like prominent brow ridges. But other than that, he's got the red hat, the red tank top. Yeah. Nearly there.
I've sometimes I think misattributed this art as already him being a monkey, just because it does look like Diddy. But if you like study it closer, slightly more gorilla-esque proportions, like a gorilla child. And there's no visible tail, at least that I can see. But it is just this like weird alternate universe version of Diddy. Kind of reminds me of, you remember the old Cocoa Krispies cereal mascot when it was like a monkey? And then I think it became a chimpanzee. It kind of reminds me of that. And I think eventually they just brought back Snap, Crackle, and Pop for the Cocoa Krispies as well. But for a brief time there in the 90s, it was a monkey. And then they used a live-action chimp, because chimps are easier to train for TV commercials. But that's kind of what it reminds me of. But yeah, this was kind of a dramatic redesign of Donkey Kong Jr. compared to what he was in the arcades. I mean, more dramatic than Donkey Kong, at the very least.
Yeah, so dramatic, in fact, that it seems Nintendo told them this was going too far off the rails and gave Rare two options. Either give the character a more traditional design in line with the arcade counterpart, or repurpose this new design into a brand new character.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really funny how things shook out with this, because I feel like 9 times out of 10 it would go the other direction. Like you would compromise to, like, God, especially nowadays, I feel like anybody would be going like hardline. No, this character has a like set brand identity that you absolutely need to follow, and he's an important IP, so you must have him.
Yeah.
This feels like a lot of just this huge butterfly effect of falling in love with this simple design of a tiny little monkey in like a schoolboy outfit. It's really funny that things just kind of all ballooned, like the DK Cranky relationship, this brand new character, DK Jr. kind of falling by the wayside, all stemming from this.
Yeah, you wouldn't see this today. And like even Donkey Kong, there was a level of compromise, of back and forth with just the Donkey Kong design, because Kev Bayless like originally went for the very, very Battletoads-esque stylized extreme early to mid 90s look, and then Miyamoto's pitch was far cuter, and they compromised. They found a middle ground there that I think works well for the Donkey Kong brand, that either extreme really wouldn't serve the needs of for what Donkey Kong Country was in the time it came out. But with Diddy, it really was like Rare was like, no, we really think we have something with this design. And we pointed out here, and I think you pointed out on Tumblr, that, you know, there's some theorizing that there was some unconscious inspiration, maybe not unconscious, maybe direct inspiration from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, given the minecart sequences and
It's really hard to deny that the team was influenced by Temple of Doom. It's just up for debate where.
Yeah. But what the relationship between Donkey Kong and what became Diddy Kong, like, turned out, it was basically Indiana Jones and Short Round from that movie. This, like, notion of this kind of, like, rough and ready kid who has this mentor who's taking them into these, like, reckless adventures, like this ultimate, like, child fantasy of being brought along on the ride with, like, your own Harrison Ford, like, role model. And that's what Diddy is. And that's why he's so, I think, he struck such a massive chord with the kids of the 90s, including me, because it was like, hell yeah. Like, this isn't just, like, there's even, like, this level of, like, it's kind of like Batman and Robin, but Robin was always the lame one. Like, Robin was, or at least in the original configuration of Robin, like, at a certain point, you're like, when you're a kid, you don't want to be Robin, you want to be Batman. But with Diddy, there was just something more relatable, because he was more of an every kid. You know what I mean? He wasn't just, like, this amazing circus acrobat, orphan. Like, I wouldn't want Robin's life, but Diddy, I could see myself being Diddy. And Rare was very much attached to this design. They thought they had something here. And so they successfully, you're right, it was a butterfly effect, because they successfully upended the entire Donkey Kong canon. And the result was they aged up the characters, they shifted the timeline forward, and they basically sacrificed the Donkey Kong Jr. IP. Like, this is unthinkable today. They basically lost Donkey Kong Jr. as a functioning thing. And yeah, we Donkey Kong fans have the debate, is the modern Donkey Kong Jr. or not? That's beside the point. I'm talking about just the image of Donkey Kong Jr., the
functionally, like, the idea of that character outside of retro throwbacks for people to wink at who are in the know is just gone.
Yeah.
Like, the Donkey Kong Jr. is not on store displays because people won't know who he is.
That's right. Yeah. They just completely said, you know what, this very, like, the second most vital part of the Donkey Kong IP, we're jettisoning that, and it's gone. And you're only going to see it in, like, shadows from here on out. And it worked. I realize some people are still upset about this because they love Donkey Kong Jr. Like, that was their character and they feel betrayed. But Diddy Kong has had far more success than Donkey Kong Jr. ever did. Like, this shouldn't have worked, and Nintendo shouldn't have allowed it. And I'm glad they did. But yeah, like, what happened was they shifted him into this monkey character, and it was just the perfect pairing. This big gorilla, like, juxtaposed with this small monkey who was trying to be like the gorilla. It was just perfect. It was like peanut butter and chocolate. It just went so well together. So let's talk about, now, in the show notes, I've kind of given them very, very, like, loose names. So I called this Diddy version 1, the Donkey Kong Country era of Diddy, the original Diddy Kong design, which is very basic, which was just a monkey in a red tank top and a red baseball cap. No insignia, no patterns, just extremely distilled down to the basics.
Yeah, no more detail than you would see on any given sprite you pull out of a Super Nintendo Donkey Kong Country game.
Yes, and no nostrils.
Well, I say no more detail. There's some details that you should be glad are hidden.
Yeah. So at the time, look, so I've spent a large part of my life, and especially, I would say 1994 through 1995, I spent a large part of that time in the backseat of the car on road trips, family vacations, or just ancillary, like, car rides back and forth with an instruction manual or a player's guide or a Nintendo Power on my knee. And I spent a large part of that just staring at the renders from Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Land. And so, of course, this looks very rudimentary. This looks very basic and rough and ugly compared to what we would get just a year later. But at the time, considering how new Silicon graphic workstations were in producing video games,
like this existing at all was the trick.
Right. So for its time, I didn't notice the deficiencies because the whole package just came together and it was something we had never seen before. So yeah, it looks a bit shit now. But back then, this was just Diddy. I didn't know any better. Like, there was nothing to compare this to. So this looked brilliant.
And we weren't looking at these renders on HD monitors at the time. You were at best looking at, like, a big magazine spread.
Yeah, that's another thing. Even playing Donkey Kong Country, we weren't seeing it in the crystal clear definition we played on today on Nintendo Switch Online or on Super NES Mini, or, you know, it was a little bit blurrier and it looked amazing still, but, you know, it hid those slight imperfections. So Cameron, what do you have to say about this early Diddy design? So we have to describe it to people. That's the difficult part of this episode. Since the conversation's audio only, I can't just put up these renders for everyone to stare at as we break it down. So how do you want to describe Diddy version 1?
So, like, just baseline, like, this is the formative Diddy. Like the things that make up Diddy's silhouette are all here. Like, there's no dispute. Somebody will recognize this is Diddy Kong.
Yeah.
But there are some, like, design omissions and quirks owing to this happening so early. Like, he doesn't have Nintendo on his hat. He doesn't have stars on his shirt. He very noticeably does not have nostrils on his where his nose is. I kind of suspect, especially because we see nostrils drawn in that concept drawing, that was just kind of like a rendering shortcoming.
Mm-hmm.
That they just knew you wouldn't be able to see him close up enough for that to matter. Because another quirk of this Diddy that I can't remember specifically if I saw it from Steve Mails or Kevin Bayless, but I know that a quirk they took a while to figure out with the NURBS rendering they were using at this point in time for Donkey Kong Country is they had difficulty seaming disparate parts together. Like, a lot of it was just sort of you could make basic shapes and butt them up against each other, and for most objects like a palm tree or something, that would be fine. Because it's okay for there to be, like, a seam in different parts. But for, say, like, somebody's elbow, it's a little bit weird if there's just a, like, big line going through on a figure for that. So that's how you get things like in Donkey Kong's case, we could see, like, all the seams on his fingers, and they were very prominent. And Diddy's got a little bit of that going here, and he's got very bony fingers, and I feel like that's something they never really shake through Rare's entire tenure with the series. He's still got these very, like, skeletal-looking fingers.
Yeah.
Even though they blend into his body more over time. Only got 3 toes at this point.
Yeah, the toes are weird because I can... The way the feet are designed, I could kind of pretend, like, sometimes the heel of the foot almost, like, curves inward, so I can say, oh, that's supposed to be the 4th toe. Okay. But it's really kind of a squint and pretend like you don't notice it situation.
Right. Like, there's a lot of times where, like, optically it looks like he's got, like, a little thumb-like 4th toe, but it's just not there.
Yeah.
And another weird thing about him only having 3 toes is we know for a fact that Donkey Kong himself originally only had 3 toes for the first game's 3D renders. There's some very, very early art for the game floating around with like an early Donkey Kong model where he doesn't have 5 toes and 5 fingers. They upped those for Donkey Kong. If you look closely at all the in-game artwork of Donkey Kong, he only has 3 toes in like the various sprites and on the title screen.
Yeah.
Because, again, old CRTs, nobody's going to notice.
Yeah, I with Donkey Kong, I always wondered if it was like Nintendo said, hey, you've got to up the fingers and toes. Unacceptable for Donkey Kong. But with Diddy, they let it slide because they considered Diddy like Rare's character more.
And just, I guess, probably because a lot of the gorilla characters were built out of Donkey Kong and a lot of the monkey characters were built out of Diddy, it kind of creates this, I say a lot, there aren't that many. It kind of creates this weird rule for early on Rare characters where, no, monkeys have 4 digits on their hands and 3 on their feet, and gorillas have the normal human amount.
Yeah, and this was something that, like, early DK Vine really, like, preached. We got on soapboxes about this, like, the finger rule. It's like, okay, so gorillas have this amount. That means you're probably a gorilla. If you're a monkey, you've got this amount of fingers. And then, like, Kiddy Kong was called Dixie's cousin, but he had 5 fingers, and we were like, well, okay, hold on. Maybe, maybe he was adopted, maybe. It's just,
there was Chunky Kong showing up with 3 fingers and a thumb on his hands, but 4 toes because he did have the thumb toe.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So yeah, DK Vine's rule was, well, Chunky must be just a very large monkey. You see, you think he's a gorilla because he's chunky, but no, because look at the fingers. This is what we lost with the buyout. I mean, we were going to lose this anyway, but I mean, just around the time of the buyout, this is what we lost is these brilliant debates about the actual type of primate each Kong was based on these little visual clues that we're trained to look for. We lost this as a fandom and I grieve for it, but alas, time moves on. But yes, the 3 toes thing, I just kind of, even back then, I think I just kind of tried my best to overlook because I'm like, well, that's a little bit too far. Obviously, growing up, you're used to cartoon characters, at least in Western animation, having 4 fingers and toes on each hand, something that, The Simpsons train me that, you make fun of it. It's just a convention, whatever. But 3 toes, okay. That's I can't process that.
But yeah, all these weird rules established aside for Diddy, this actual design did not stick around very long in use because DKC2 happened a year later.
Yeah.
And immediately Rare upped their render game twice over in that time.
Yeah, they really got confident with their skills. Like Donkey Kong Country, looking back, it was so rudimentary, and they were really just figuring out how to get the most out of it. And then with Donkey Kong Country 2, also you see with Killer Instinct 2, like just the leap from that first game to the second game and how dramatic.
Oh, absolutely.
It is. But yeah, like the early Diddy appeared in Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Land artwork. And then Donkey Kong Country 2. Well, in the lead up to Donkey Kong Country 2, we kind of got what I call Diddy version 1.5, sort of this bridge between the 2 designs, because it was clear that they were already going to get a little bit more fanciful with Diddy's design, with like breaking up just the very mono color of the red. They were going to add a little bit to his clothing to distinguish him a little bit more. And so you see these renders, they were very early renders, and they popped up in some promotional material, some released, some that like were really only seen in like the pre-release like hype material.
But the lifespan of this render is very short, to the point that we only have like a couple variants of it floating around.
Yeah, I believe the player's guide, the US player's guide had this render. It appeared on some like early shirts for it, but generally it's the renders of Diddy and like Dixie, and Diddy's holding up the Nintendo. I guess they're both holding up the Nintendo logo.
Yeah, like Steve Mails has a tweet saying that they were used for E3 badges in 1995 to give you like an idea of the timeline for these.
Yeah.
But it is basically what we would see in the next step of renders for Diddy, but he doesn't have rendered fur.
Yeah.
That's really the big major difference. The big major additions here are he does have nostrils.
Thank God. He had to hold his breath for an entire year.
He's got a tongue now.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the lack of tongue on Diddy in version 1. Diddy didn't have a tongue. There was nothing going on in that mouth. He couldn't taste, he couldn't smell.
He has no style, he has no taste.
And yeah,
big additions here also are the two stars, which have kind of become Diddy's most prominent iconography, I'd say.
Yeah, the stars, I guess they're supposed to be evocative of the star in the Donkey Kong logo, but it is...
I have to think it's the same.
It has just...
And there's even two of them to match the number of O's
signature.
in the Donkey Kong logo.
I never put that together. I honestly like never thought about the actual number, but yeah, you're right. The stars are kind of a constant on most of the renders of this era, but what comes and goes is the Nintendo logo they added to his hat, which it's kind of a hit or miss whether this actually appears on renders going into Diddy version 2, which is where they added the rendered fur for the very first time.
I suspect a reason the Nintendo logo comes and goes, which I'd be curious to know if they came up with that idea and also the idea for for Dixie Kong to have a rare logo pin like concurrently, to have this sort of like, you know, boyfriend and girlfriend with matching clothes, like cute thing they have. But I suspect one reason it's not in every render could just be the practicality of, if you put the Nintendo logo on Diddy's hat, you cannot mirror it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so they would have to do that, like, the very last thing, right? So it doesn't always make it through. But it's worth pointing out that the, like, Diddy render that, like, his rendered look starting in 1995, while it translated on like in-game appearances of the render, it wasn't actually on his in-game sprite. Like that was still the design from Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah, we'll obviously get to it, but the Nintendo logo showing up in actual Donkey Kong games, or like games period, takes way longer than you'd think.
Yeah, it and I mean, that makes sense given the nature of
the screen and texture resolution they're working with.
Right, like through the N64 to the GameCube, like, yeah, it would make sense that it wouldn't actually be there, which maybe, you know, suggests it wasn't the best decision to just put a Nintendo logo on the hat, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, yeah, but, yeah, this is probably the, like, where Diddy's look really starts to gel, and really, like, this is the look he's been known for 29 years now, is stars and Nintendo logo on his hat. Like, that's the basic look for Diddy that people are familiar and comfortable with now. But the addition of rendered fur was just, I remember seeing the renders for the very first time and being just bewildered that it had that leap. And now they look like pipe cleaners. They look like these weird arts and craft projects, but at the time, having that
there's
rendered
kind of
fur,
like a directionlessness to a lot of the fur. Like they look like very staticky or
yeah.
But just the fact that it was there at all and for the time looked pretty convincing. It's still not the worst. And worth pointing out, when Donkey Kong Country 1 got re-released, they kind of buried the DKC1 renders for the box art and like high-profile promotional art. I think kind of aware how dated they looked.
Yeah.
Everything from DKC2 onward, fair game.
Yeah, the remix of Donkey Kong Country for both the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance, I think they both used Donkey Kong 64 renders in their promotional material. Because, the huge leap from 94 to 99, let alone from 94 to 95. Yeah, they did bury that original artwork, which is why it was so great to see it on Nintendo Switch online once again, just embracing the dated artwork. It's something Nintendo doesn't do often, although they have been using the same Jungle Beat renders for 20 years now. But, Donkey Kong Country, they don't touch that stuff often, and I have such fondness and nostalgia for it, so...
Yeah, not a lot to... These two kind of come as a package, so there's not much more to add to this next generation other than they added fur.
Did they... his eyes. So Diddy's got the very, cartoony... They look like just one massive, conjoined set of eyes, right?
Yeah, and they blend together a bit better in the 2 era renders than they did in the original, because again, they were running up against that whole, there's a seam between parts thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was going to say, in the renders of Donkey Kong Country, I remember seeing, a visible line between the eyes, they're clearly separate, whereas in Country 2, I think that's where they just, started looking like it was just, one massive eye.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell if it's, it was one shape, but it's just a lot more defined because of the lighting, or, it could just be a trick of the light because of how these renders work.
Yeah.
But it does look a lot more seamless in 2 onward.
Yeah.
And going forward, I future designs without Rare's handiwork, I feel just kind of run with the idea of these are one solid shape.
Yeah. Which I kind of like having them be just subtly separate. That's the one piece of render fragmentation that I do appreciate, but it doesn't really matter. It's just cartoony eyes. But speaking of eyes, Diddy version 3, as I call it. This is where Diddy got his most substantial, albeit temporary, evolution. That basically lasted for the rest of the Rare era. Because starting with Diddy Kong Racing, and Diddy Kong Racing, Diddy's inclusion in that game was relatively last minute, as we've often discussed. It was Pro-Am 64 up until behind the scenes E3 97. That's really where it started moving in the direction of Diddy Kong Racing, where Banjo-Kazooie, when that was delayed until later in 1998, Nintendo was left without a big holiday title. They knew that Pro-Am 64 could be ready to go, but they were like, that's not a very marketable game for a big holiday release. What if you put a Kong as the star of it? And they picked Diddy Kong. And so it was kind of a last minute decision. And so I have to wonder how quickly the design changes that Diddy underwent for it, like what the thought process there, because it's not like they just had this ready to go, like, oh, this new look for Diddy.
And we know Kev Bayless was on character design duty for Diddy Kong Racing, so I feel like this is sort of him getting a second pass at his own character.
Yeah, that's true, because Kev Bayless, I don't believe Kev Bayless worked on Country 2. So this really would be like bringing it back home for him and giving him like the 3 years benefit of time to say, what can I do to make this a better character design? And I'm not really sure if this actually improved Diddy whatsoever. I have nostalgia for it. I have fondness for it. But I can't honestly say if this was a good decision or not, because I don't know if it was. And if it was, I think Nintendo would have kept it. But they give him blue eyes.
It's debatable. The big marquee addition here is Diddy has blue eyes now.
It's a bit weird for a monkey, I'll say.
I do think in this game it makes a little bit of sense, because they have kind of dictated for Diddy Kong Racing that red and blue are Diddy's like signature colors.
Uh-huh.
Like they are the in-game colors of his plane. Like artwork shows it for like his car and hovercraft. Sometimes they flub it and like use a light blue, but I think that might have just been like a back and forth in development. But I think like when you make the character's signature color blue, you need to introduce some blue into his design, or it's kind of weird.
I guess, yeah, that's a fair point. But yeah, the blue eyes, this mostly became the standard for the rest of the Rare era, and was going to continue like before the buyout.
It's kind of funny that, as you said, this was such a temporary adjustment to Diddy's design in the long run, because by virtue of being in Diddy Kong Racing, which was like Nintendo's high-profile holiday release of '97, and DK64, another humongous game for them, this version of Diddy was everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, I'd say before like the late 2000s, the most merchandised version of Diddy.
Yeah, the Toy Biz action figure. Yeah. It did become a prevalent part of his design for that era.
Even had two versions of the plush that went around at the time, where one of them had the old black eyes, and another one specifically for Diddy Kong Racing had the blue ones.
Yeah. So like I said, I have fondness for the blue-eyed Diddy, but
he's on the infamous Diddy-shaped CD soundtrack.
Which befuddles younger people who don't remember the portable CD players that could actually play them. But yeah, it's too much Sinatra. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I don't think of like a monkey as like, oh yeah, old blue eyes over there. But, you know, like I said, I have fondness for it. I can like intellectually say, maybe that wasn't the right decision, but like in my heart, I love it, because this is just something I accept. It's like, oh, Diddy had blue eyes. They just never could show it with the graphical fidelity on the Super Nintendo. Now that we have the more powerful N64, we can fully see his eyes as nature intended. And I mean, it wasn't the only design tweak with Diddy Kong Racing. There were other things, most notably the hat brim just would not stay down for Diddy Kong Racing. It was always just flopping up to the point where you could barely see the Nintendo logo on most of the renders.
Yeah, which I guess made sense, since he was like it's supposed to be like it's flapping in the wind sort of thing.
I guess, yeah.
A little bit, but I guess even though hats are kind of meant to be rigid. But it's to the point where I think of like that Toy Biz I think it was Toy Biz, not Toy Sight, for the Diddy Kong Racing figures, right?
Toy Biz did the Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Kart 64 figures. Toy Sight did the actual Donkey Kong line from 1999.
Yeah. That I think of Diddy's hat in that, where they kind of made it like very pronounced and like kind of coming to an upward point, probably because they were using Diddy Kong Racing's like head-on renders as a reference.
Yeah.
But yeah, the blue eyes was something that, like, with the benefit of hindsight, I am cool with losing. At the time, in the early 2000s, I was like, no, this is a core part of Diddy's design. How dare you? Because I was just so resistant to change.
Especially with the change of the
anything
era.
Rare established.
Yeah, the change of the era where you felt like you had to fight and preserve everything that Rare laid down because you felt like it was all at risk all of a sudden. So you got very territorial, and everything that Rare did was like sacred, right? Don't you touch Diddy's blue eyes. What do you mean he has a different amount of fingers now? You get over it eventually. And once you realize that Diddy is safe and Diddy's not going anywhere, but at the time it was, this is holy and don't you dare besmirch it. It's like adding, a monocle and top hat to the Mona Lisa. You don't want to do it. But, like Diddy Kong Racing and, his in-game model for Diddy Kong Racing, I don't even think it had the right amount of stars. It just had the 1 star on his back even, which was...
I feel like it was kind of inconsistent in this era where, like, depending on who was on art duties or, like, especially, like, on merchandise and stuff, like, the stars would just fluctuate.
Yeah.
In amount and placement. Like, are they also on the back of his shirt? Is there only one on the back of his shirt? And for Diddy Kong Racing in-game, I can probably assume it's just a consequence of Diddy was last minute and we only have so much real estate for a texture for here.
Right. Obviously, there's no Nintendo logo on his hat, which... in game, for whatever reason, like everything's kind of shiny in Diddy Kong Racing. And so I always thought his hat like had this metallic sheen to it. Like it's almost like this plasticky material like they wear in the future in Back to the Future Part 2.
I looked up just to verify for my memory. The front of Diddy's shirt has 2 stars in Diddy Kong Racing. The back has 1.
Okay. Yeah. So, that stuff really wasn't locked down in this era, and it was very much like part of the arguments is like, does Diddy really have stars on his shirt? I know he does in renders, but you look in the in-game model of the Donkey Kong Country series, and he doesn't have any of that stuff. And we got to Diddy Kong Racing, and it was like, well, I guess he has stars on his shirt, but does he really have a Nintendo logo on his hat, or is it just this metallic hat? And that this is the consequence of the era where when a character's design is a little bit too busy, a little bit too fussy, and it can't properly be portrayed given the limitations of the time, you have these discrepancies pop up. And I mean, that's why characters have very basic designs like Mario, where you can clearly make out like the pattern of his overalls, and that's all that really is important. You don't really have to display the little M on his hat, but yeah, it's fine because eventually the technology caught up with the design, but they did tweak this a little bit, with Donkey Kong 64. It's not a full-on, like, next step in the evolution of the character. This is why I call this kind of version 3.5 a little bit, because in Donkey Kong 64, the main thing they did was, I think, improve the fur texture a little bit. They made it a little bit more matted down, where it looked like natural hair.
Like follows the contours of like his arms and legs a little bit more, like flowing down his body instead of just kind of being very wiry. Yeah. They
did also like make the hat brim just pointing outward rather than up all the time.
Yeah. But like at a glance, this just does look like the Diddy Kong Racing model if you weren't as obsessive as we are about this nonsense.
I will say this render, this is like what I consider to be like teenage Diddy, because for whatever reason, in some of the renders, the proportions seem a little bit, I was going to say lankier, but that's a different Kong in this game, so that's a bit confusing. But he seems a little bit taller. I don't know. Like
I definitely see it, especially in the posing of this one render that we have in our show notes. That like people will recognize if you just search DK64 Diddy, where he's standing very upright, has his legs spread very far apart, and is folding his arms across his chest and like looking down.
Yeah.
And I think it might be like the same model proportions, but this is just such a more dynamic pose and angle for Diddy that it's throwing off the image of him.
Yeah. He is just portrayed a little bit cockier in Donkey Kong 64, so that might also it might be like a trick of the mind where I just perceive him as being older and taller because he acts older. But
Diddy's Sonic Adventure phase.
You know, we didn't mention that the actual like skin tone of Diddy also kind of gets a little bit darker. Like even going into Donkey Kong Country 2, but I would say by the time of Donkey Kong 64, it's like a little bit. The contrast is shifted a little bit.
Yeah. And the first game's renders, like, Diddy looks very pale and often, like, reddish, and I think it just might be the lighting.
Yeah, by the time of Donkey Kong 64...
It definitely feels like they settle into a color palette for him more and more over time.
Yeah, by the time of Donkey Kong 64, he's got, like, a healthy tan, almost. And yeah, you kind of lose the unnatural shading of that. But, you know, we know from Donkey Kong Racing and other games that were announced at E3 2001 that Diddy was going to undergo another substantial revision in that era. He still had the blue eyes under Rare and the direction they were going to take him, but he was going to have 5 fingers and 5 toes. And I imagine Nintendo finally told them, look, there's some cultural taboo about characters, or at least heroic characters with 4 fingers in Japanese media.
And now that our games are high fidelity enough for people to actually notice.
Yeah. So the whole thing with Diddy getting extra fingers was going to happen no matter what. It wasn't necessarily, oh, Rare has been bought by Microsoft. We're going to use Diddy internally now, so we need to make some adjustments. It was going to happen no matter what. But the way things shook out was Rare's bought by Microsoft in 2002. Diddy is taken, like, basically adopted by Nintendo at that point, and they start using him in things like Mario Golf, Toadstool Tour, and Mario Kart Double Dash, and Donkey Konga, and that means, like, the first time we see the new look of Diddy post buyout, that's when he suddenly had the extra fingers and extra toes that he wasn't portrayed with before. And yes, this, because his first appearance in this new design, which I call Diddy version 4, the early buyout era version of Diddy, because his first appearance was in Toadstool Tour, post Rare, that gave us the, in my opinion, and I know probably the majority of our listeners will disagree, but in my opinion, the most cheeky bit of fanon, and the most delightfully cheeky bit of fanon, I'll say, that DK Vine's ever devised, prosthetic golfing fingers. I've said before, it's like nonsense poetry when you say it out loud, but I it's like, oh, why does Diddy suddenly have more fingers? And then eventually, why does Dixie have more fingers? Oh, okay, they bought prosthetic golfing fingers in a Mushroom Kingdom. Right? Makes sense. So yeah, but from this point on, all the Kongs are portrayed with 5 fingers, except when they reuse old renders from the Rare era. Occasionally they will crop up, and they're not gonna like go in and change those.
Hope you ignore them.
Yeah. We don't ignore them because we're obsessives and weirdos, but it's fine. It's fine. So, beyond just the digit shift for the early buyout era version of Diddy, they did also standardize some things. This is also the era where they started standardizing a lot of Nintendo characters, but specifically like Mario and Donkey Kong characters. They stopped radically changing from game to game. You got a little bit more stability from this point on. You'd still have alterations over time, but it would be more slow moving. It wouldn't be with every single major game or generation shift. They would have new designs.
I think part of that was just because Donkey Kong games, aside from the Kongas and later Paion's efforts, like, for a spell weren't being made, so you had time for these versions of these characters that were meant to be like all purpose for anybody who picked up like the Mario license being able to stick around longer. And like this is definitely like a Diddy purpose built for that. Like I will say this is like a Diddy and Donkey that don't feel like they came from a different game next to Mario characters. Yeah. There's a bit of a loss of that individual series identity during this time. It's like for good or for ill. I do like some of the changes that they kind of were edging toward in this era for Diddy. They kind of like soften and like round off the shape of his ears a lot more than the last turn Rare had with it, and I think that's ultimately a really, really good choice. Like, simpler is better. Diddy doesn't need like basically human ears. Yeah, his ears are definitely like made more monkey-like, honestly. Like they look more like a cartoon monkey versus what he had before, which they were a bit like longer and more human, I guess. Like human ears if they were stretched out a little bit. And these are definitely like rounder and softer. The skin tone was also lightened a little bit from what Rare had them. But like the big change too beyond the fingers, the one that was immediately noticed by everyone before we actually counted the amount of fingers on his hand, were the removal of the blue eyes. He went back to black pupils for most of the time, not entirely all of the time, but. And some of the changes here, I think, not just for like technical reasons, like on the promotional art side, but I think just for more parity with the in-game models, because I feel like you saw more of a concentrated effort from the GameCube on to blur the line between promotional art and in-game assets a little bit more, that you could get that, wow, everything looks just like it does on the box effect. Yeah. So like we don't have the rendered fur on him anymore. They've kind of flattened things out and it's a texture that looks more convincing than DKC1's texture for him, I gotta say, but it's still just like, it's definitely a compromise. When you're used to the big furriness of Rare's renders, it definitely felt like a come down, and I remember it being like, oh, he's not going to look as good now, is he? But looking back, I do like this design. Like, this isn't bad. And it was really cool to see Diddy, like, side by side with Mario. Like, as much as I'm like, no, the Donkey Kong series is a separate thing, it was still really, really neat to have Diddy get his due. And some of the stuff I, like, would take issue with, I don't even think is, like, really a design error, but just like a consequence of technical limitations they were encountering. Like I feel like his skin tone looks a little bit weird in these. Like it's very like kind of ghostly in some of these renders, but then I remember all the Mario renders from this era kind of look that way because they have this like flat black shading on everything. There's not like ambient occlusion, like giving things more natural lighting. And you can see with the way some of the Mario renders evolve that just the act of having proper lighting makes things look a lot more natural and full of life. And I think that might just be what's going on with Diddy here.
Yeah, very washed out almost. But yeah, like I said, not bad for a first pass when, Diddy's brought into Nintendo. And he was the first one, too. Like, it took them a while to standardize the look of the Kongs.
Yeah.
Like, Dixie...
To the point, this, like, version of Diddy was alongside, like, very, like, slavish attempts to recreate Rare Era Dixie and Cranky and Konga.
Yeah. So the Konga series, like Cranky, K. Rool, Dixie, and Donkey Konga 2, they were still very much modeled after their Rare looks, and it took them like an additional year or so to become standardized. Like Dixie lost the knee pads, and it wasn't until King of Swing that we really started to see the standardization of the Kong cast in effect, which is funny because, King of Swing had a completely different art style. That it had the hand-drawn kind of look for the Kong cast. So the very first time we saw like the new designs for Candy and Wrinkly and Funky, it was in King of Swing before they even had renders for them. And the Diddy version in King of Swing, we should point this out because it's effectively what Nintendo was going for with Diddy before King of Swing, but he is a lot rounder. I don't even know how to describe it, but there is kind of this softness to him, and also his nose, his nostrils feel. In the original, like, early buyout era render of Diddy, they kind of raised his nostrils a little bit more. Or am I just seeing that?
Well, definitely in this King of Swing artwork, they make an effort to, like, kind of add, like, an extra ridge out. Or, like, they kind of, like, make, like, Diddy's mouth overall, like, more of a coconut shape and bump out the nose to kind of, like, break even with where the nostril ridge would be. But I love the artwork for King of Swing to death. It's charming as heck. On some of its characters, I question some of the ways it would go on to inform the 3D designs. Like I've taken issue with Dixie losing certain elements of her character. But for Diddy and Donkey, I think it looks good. And I know most of the modern 2D art of Diddy and DK, which there has been a lot of, increasingly more often as the Mario series has kind of leaned back more into using like 2D art for promotion and UI and like tie-ins for emoticons and such. And most of that is attributed to Shigehisa Nakaway, and he's credited in King of Swing, but I don't know that he was responsible for this art. But I see a lot of the same sensibilities. Like you still see this like distinct nostril like ridge for Diddy Kong and all of his stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like with time that has kind of fed back more into the 3D renders of Diddy, where the 3D renders of Diddy are still very standard, but I feel like the like posing of them is more informed by the way Nakaway draws him in 2D, which I think is a really good direction for the series.
It's been a very slow walk to give Diddy an actual nose rather than just holes in his skull.
And he's even later to the party than Donkey Kong.
Yeah, like Donkey got like his infamous nose job. Right? In the Switch era, like they're like, all right, we're gonna finally just give Donkey Kong a nose, deal with it. But yeah, Diddy, it's been a more gradual kind of walk to that, from having no nostrils at all to actually having some semblance of a nose on his face. And it's been a very subtle shift, one that I don't actually mind at all, because it's almost like it was there all along. You just couldn't make it out. It's not like the jarring thing where all of a sudden he's got an extra finger on each hand, an extra toe on each foot, or maybe 2 extra toes on each foot, and his eyes are shifting color. Anyway, yeah. Diddy's look in King of Swing isn't as dramatic as some of the other Kongs, where it was the first time they were getting that sort of glow up or makeover from the Rare era into the post buyout era. But Rare actually got to fuss a little bit more with Diddy and do one more pass at doing a Diddy design. It's a very, very weird era.
Yeah, this is... I'll be blunt. Diddy Kong Racing DS's 3D assets are kind of weird.
So some of them I really like. Like, I like the way WizPig looks. I like the way all the boss characters look. Okay, but for the actual Diddy Kong racers, for the primary cast, it's a bit weird. So
it does kind of feel like the handheld team being dealt a hand they're not used to dealing with.
Yeah, a hand with 5 fingers.
And the way I describe like this take on Diddy is it feels like a concentrated effort to bring him more in line with how Donkey Kong was looking at this time, which was Jungle Beat. Yeah. I feel like this is a very Jungle Beat-esque version of Diddy, but it's filtered through the lens of Rare having been the ones to contribute the model. So it kind of just doesn't fit in at either table.
It is sort of like the worst of both worlds, isn't it? It's wild to me because, yeah, Diddy wasn't even in Jungle Beat, infamously, much to our strife, much to our chagrin. And Diddy Kong Racing DS was the last time Rare has made a new game under the Donkey Kong / Diddy Kong umbrella, IP, whatever. And so they also couldn't use like any of the old artwork, right? I think primarily because Banjo and Conquer were to be excluded from Diddy Kong Racing DS. And so that, and they had to add Dixie and Tiny, and it basically meant that they had to just create all new renders from the ground up for everybody, the entirety of the cast. And because of that, they looked toward Jungle Beat, the most recent mainline Donkey Kong game, and they acted accordingly, and they basically Jungle Beatified Diddy's look in Diddy Kong Racing DS, which meant darker fur, toothy grins out the wazoo. Like this is where you really start seeing Diddy emulate Donkey Kong, because a lot of the artwork in Diddy Kong Racing DS, and honestly, not just Diddy Kong, for characters like Tip Top and like they're just doing that.
Yeah, that box art is a parade of teeth.
Parade of teeth. Yeah, they gave the entirety of the cast 5 fingers, even Crunch, which is weird because the 5 finger rules.
I feel like they got an edict from Nintendo to give everybody 5 fingers, and instead of asking for clarification, like, do you just mean the monkeys, the mammals, the good guys? They just applied 5 across the board to be safe.
Yeah, because it's never applied to Kremlings. All the Kremling designs under Nintendo have retained 4 fingers. So
yeah, I've kind of gotten the impression that like, if they're not human, if they're not a mammal, if they're sufficiently like not anthropomorphic, you can get away with 4 fingers. Like, especially like reptiles in particular seem like just totally exempt. Like,
yeah,
Bowser has 4, Koopas have 4, Yoshi has 4. Does not matter.
Yeah, that does seem to be these sort of, if not unspoken rule than a soft rule. But this is also, is there something wrong with his head, Cameron? The Diddy Kong Racing DS Diddy. It looks like his face has gotten longer.
Yeah, something. I don't know. It might just be the posing, but this is just a very off-looking Diddy to me in general.
Man, you've been an...
It's not... It's not helped that this is also a Diddy redesign that, like, for the first time in one of Rare's ports, ended up, like being retroactively applied to the original game. Like, they redid his model to be, like, closer to this. They got rid of the blue eyes. They added the Nintendo logo, kind of, like, gave him a general, like, touch-up.
Yeah.
And, like, I know we've just discussed that, like, I'm cool that the blue eyes kind of went away. I feel like it's a change that is, like, lateral enough that I no longer really mourn it. It feels wrong for Diddy Kong Racing not to have them.
Right.
Especially when they have, like, a couple textures where they accidentally left them in.
Yeah, but man, you've been a naughty boy. You let your face grow long, is what I'm going to hear in my head whenever I race Bluey in Diddy Kong Racing DS. This is also, though, an important milestone. This is the debut of the current or more modern Nintendo logo on Diddy's hat, because from 95 to 2007, Diddy had the Nintendo logo with the white background in the middle, and the red Nintendo logo with the white background. And then in Diddy Kong Racing DS, he got a hat with the white Nintendo logo.
Right, because this was the era where Nintendo themselves had kind of rebranded to this very, like, clean white aesthetic with both the Wii and the DS. And, like, of course it makes sense, like, you updated the primary Nintendo branding, therefore Diddy would have newer branding. I think just by complete happenstance, this looks better for Diddy, because it's just a simpler logo, it's a simpler color combo.
I agree.
It even works, like, carried forward into the Switch era now that Nintendo's brought more of the red back into their branding, because you still got the red hat.
Yeah, I don't like the Nintendo logo of this era. I don't like the design ethos of this era in general. Like, not just Nintendo, but just everywhere, where everything was just kind of stripped down to, like, just the barest of appearances, and everything was kind of, like, clean and sterile almost. And I'm glad there's more color in the Nintendo logo, but you're right. For Diddy's hat, this actually works better. I've come around on this. So, as weird and different as the Diddy Kong Racing DS design was, it did actually mark the debut of something that has endured to this day. So, it's got that going for it. But, yeah, this is a weird anomaly from an era that I feel like was full of anomalies. Like 2007, 2008, there was a lot of, like, one-offs or brief variations on Diddy, partially because this is when Sprawl came out. And of course, Smash Brothers is always filled with, like, very unique, hyper detailed looks for characters. But
it's the first time I've heard Super Smash Bros. Brawl run together as Sprawl, and I kind of like it.
But this is also the era where we got Payon's other releases, Jungle Climber and Donkey Kong Barrel Blast / Jet Race, depending on your region. And this gave us, I guess, the next fundamental variation in Diddy's design that's not just an aberration, that actually, like, was in more than one game. So I'll call it Diddy version 5 full on, but it's the Payon render of Diddy.
It's hard to feel like you can attribute any lasting effects of Smash renders of characters, like, having a lasting legacy going forward, because they are very much one-offs, because Smash has such a set style that does not really carry over to like the individual franchises, unless you're Kirby or Kid Icarus.
Right. Unless Sakurai actually plucks you into or out of Smash and say, you're my baby now. But, yeah, so like, well, let's start with the Payon render, because I feel like, well, one, like, just chronologically speaking, it came before Brawl, and
Right.
it did, like, on the surface, you might look at this and say there's nothing fundamentally different about this version of Diddy from the early buyout era version of Diddy. But there are a couple of tweaks. One, the Nintendo, and this isn't a tweak, but this is just to contrast with Diddy Kong Racing DS. The Nintendo logo didn't immediately change. There wasn't a ripple effect across all of Diddy's appearances. He still had the old hat in the Payon games of this era.
Yeah, this just seems like a late memo kind of thing.
Yeah. What's weird, though, compared to Diddy Kong Racing DS, or maybe even partially informed by Diddy Kong Racing DS, but it feels like in the Payon games, the brim of the hat is doing the Diddy Kong Racing style of like always flip it up, it seems like. So it isn't even like you're always seeing the Nintendo logo on the renders, because a lot of times it's obscured by the brim of the hat.
And again, I guess it makes it handy for some of them if you just want to, like, if you want to mirror it, the stars will be wrong, but it's such an abstract shape, people aren't going to notice.
Right.
People will notice backwards text.
The big shift, I would say, with the Payon render, other than just the quality being, like, improved, is that I feel like this is when the size of Diddy was reduced. We can talk about, was he supposed to be taller in Donkey Kong 64? But Diddy pretty much had a consistent size compared to Donkey Kong in the Rare era. And I feel like
smaller Diddy theory.
I feel like, yeah, this is when Diddy actually shrunk. And this is primarily for gameplay purposes. But like on the renders, you see Diddy just like holding on to Donkey Kong's back. And it's a thing that would, of course, really be taken to its logical extreme in the retro era that was forthcoming. But we first really saw it in this Payon era, where Diddy was portrayed as a smaller character in contrast to Donkey Kong.
Yeah, I go back and forth on how I feel about making... I guess it's not so much making Diddy smaller as it is making Donkey Kong gigantic sometimes.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm generally like pretty indifferent to it, just based on like the needs of the game.
Yeah, well...
Like when you have a game where Diddy has to crawl up on his back, it makes sense for him to be a little bit smaller.
I guess...
Which is the case in Jungle Climber. It did it before Returns.
I guess Rare just weaned me on not caring about the relative sizes of characters, because Donkey Kong Land K. Rool was like diminutive, and then Banjo-Kazooie, like everybody's as big as a house compared to Banjo and Kazooie. So, you know, at a certain point, you just kind of
you kind of just have to rationalize, like, well, no, everybody's humongous compared to Banjo and Banjo-Kazooie, so that you can see them from far away and know to interact with them. It's not that they're giants and Banjo is a tiny little guy.
It's weird where I draw the line, right? Like the finger thing, I'm like, no, prosthetic golfing fingers. And then the sizes, I'm like, oh, it's just a gameplay thing. Just ignore it. Like, why does my brain like have these hard divides? And then it just loosey-goosey for the other stuff. I don't know. And like, I've said, oh, well, you know, Banjo slouches, so he just appears smaller. Yeah, just don't worry about it. But the biggest news for Diddy during this time was the huge victory that the Donkey Kong fandom had. And this was basically the culmination of a lot of the buyout era angst, the mistranslated Jungle Beat interview, the drama over whether or not Diddy would be cast aside eventually. Diddy getting into Super Smash Bros. Brawl was one of the biggest moments for our fandom, especially of this era. This huge dancing in the streets celebration when Super Smash Bros. Dojo updated far later than it normally did. In the US, it was like super early in the morning.
It can't be overstated just how much pessimism there was about the state of the Donkey Kong franchise at this time.
Yeah.
Like, not only was there a lot of doubt we'd get Diddy in this game, there was initial doubt we were getting Donkey Kong. That was just how down... And it wasn't just, like... Yeah, DK Vine was particularly down in the dumps in those years, but it wasn't even just our community where I saw that sentiment. People just sort of took for granted that, well... Donkey Kong as a series doesn't have the profile it used to, and the latest game just had Donkey Kong.
A lot of it seems like silly pessimism on our end, but you have to keep in mind,
the latest console game, I should say. Latest mainline console game. Because people weren't, even then, weren't giving Payon's games the time of day.
Right. You have to keep in mind, too, that a lot of the cynicism and downtrodden mood of the Donkey Kong fandom, it wasn't just coming from us, it was also coming from just the way the series was treated in the gaming press at the time. The media, like, it was just this whole era of Donkey Kong Country is overrated, the characters are trash, and stuff like that.
I feel like it was kind of this confluence of, like, the general attitude of the era, not the Attitude Era, but
right,
like the general like aesthetic of like games writing of the time was like, you are cynical, you tear into everything,
right.
You do not pull any punches. You cannot build something up. You have to be too cool for this, but at the same time still do it.
Right.
And also a lot of Gen Xers kind of getting into writing roles at the time, who were older Gen Xers who didn't really have the affinity for Donkey Kong Country that a lot of younger people did.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was also just the general sentiment of, well, people are really not big fans of this Microsoft buyout. And in order to make peace with it, we are going to pretend everything Rare ever did was not really worth writing home about. So really, it's not a big loss that they're not with Nintendo anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all that being said, getting Diddy in Super Smash Bros. Brawl was just, I think, the culmination of the buyout era, honestly. Like, obviously, the buyout era, like, we define it as lasting until the release of Donkey Kong Country Returns, which saw the fandom kind of turn the page a little bit and put some of those demons, like, back to hell. But,
Diddy being here was, like, a big, like, oh, actually, we won, everybody. It's okay.
It was the point where we realized Diddy's here to stay, and he's not going anywhere, because like this Brawl is the game where I termed Smash Brothers as the kingmaker, because it was clear that when you got into Smash, basically, like, the world was your oyster. Like, you didn't have to worry about that character anymore, which is why, like, all of the
you are a character that will never fall out of the spotlight, and also everything you do from now on will be at least a little bit informed by what Smash had you do.
Absolutely, which is why I find some of the recent pessimism about King K. Rool that's been kind of informed by the theme park. I find that to be misplaced. I'm like, he's a Smash Brothers character. You don't have to worry about King K. Rool. But, like, yeah, Diddy's design...
You people know who Roy is.
Right. There are two Roys in Smash Brothers now. It's a great time for Roys. But the design for Diddy and Smash, of course, Smash always has its own bespoke takes on characters, where you have... In a way, it kind of harkens back to what Rare would do, like going above and beyond with detail. And
yeah, like the general design ethos, at least for Melee and Brawl especially would be, I would say, like, what if the way these characters usually look, but we crank up the detail dial?
Yeah. Yeah. So you saw for the very first time the stitching on Diddy's clothes, the seams on his hat. Just stuff like that, which was amazing for the time.
Yeah. And they kind of hit on this like solution for both DK and Diddy to like kind of give the illusion of rendered fur without just flattening out everything. Like their in-game models, you can see they kind of do this by like basically having these like polygonal shingles hanging off the characters that are like selective bits of transparent texture where they do fur. But it's genuinely a really clever way to do it, and going along with that nervousness everybody felt back in the day, this was, again, a time of misinformed and misdirected animosity toward Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, and a lot of use of Jungle Beat Donkey Kong in side games because that was the current Donkey Kong model. So I think a lot of people took for granted, well, if Diddy and DK show up in Smash Brawl, they're just going to look like they did in Jungle Beat. And not only is that very much not the case, Diddy and Donkey Kong look like absolutely fantastic in Brawl. Like some of the best either characters ever looked, I think.
Brawl was really, I think, the highlight for both characters, not just in appearance, but personality-wise, depiction, like the way they interacted together. It was kind of like a return to form for both of them.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think it is the best in-game depiction of the dynamic between Donkey Kong and Diddy, and that is counting everything Rare put out.
Absolutely, yeah. The Subspace Emissary, that famous scene of Donkey and Diddy like working in tandem. It's just like, yeah, that's what the relationship would be after the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, where it's not even just like mentor and sidekick. It's like adventuring partners, right? And it was terrific. I love it. But the Smash Brawl design of Diddy also gave him brown eyes instead of black eyes or blue eyes. Brown eyes, which what do you think about his brown eyes, Cameron?
So I've noticed that like games after this will revert to the gray eyes, and like it kind of seems like they'll go away and then Smash will bring them back again, and then they'll go away and then another Smash will bring them back again.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think brown eyes are the best call for Diddy. They fit the rest of his color scheme, and it gives him something so his eyes aren't just pure black.
Yeah. I you're right. It's weird because I always discount the brown eyes out of the three options, but you're like looking at all these renders we have in our show notes, all of the contrast between them. I'm like, yeah, it just pulls it together in a way that all of the previous and future designs really didn't. So
yeah. And I've also got to say about Brawl in general, I feel like as cool as Brawl looked to me at the time, I think some of its color palette choices are hit and miss for certain characters, because they do tend toward washed out. Like I think of Bowser in Brawl, where he just looks kind of ghoulish with how much saturation is sucked out.
Yeah.
Diddy and DK, I feel like, come off some of the best in the cast because they have this sort of reddish tint to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially in their skin, and I think it really kind of works for them. It just makes them look like slightly sunbaked in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, it almost brought his the skin tone back to what it was under Rare, just a little bit, like that sort of more pale look that he had in the buyout era or early buyout era. Yeah, it really. I honestly, if I'm thinking about it, Cameron, I think Brawl might be my favorite Diddy design.
It's a really, really solid one. It is one of the best ways he's ever looked, I think.
Yeah, like
Honestly, it's weird to me how much Smash 4 feels like a downgrade from this, because by all rights it should be better in every single way, and it just isn't.
I hate the Smash 4 Diddy design. I know we're not there yet in the chronology, but yeah,
it's just hard not to talk about it at this stage.
Yeah. It was a huge downgrade in a game full of disappointments for me personally. That was also just, and that's the way his amiibo looked. I'm like, oh god. Anyway, yeah, Brawl Diddy might be my favorite Diddy design. So we then had what we'll call Diddy version 6, the late buyout era before Donkey Kong Country Returns. They tweaked his model a little bit more for appearances like Mario Super Sluggers, Mario Kart Wii.
They basically a cleaned up version of the models we've already seen up to this point that they've been using for cameo games.
Mm-hmm.
Like to get rid of the visible polygons and finally update the Nintendo logo on his hat.
Yeah, this is where the Nintendo logo that debuted in Diddy Kong Racing DS becomes the universal standard for Diddy going forward. And you see a lot of these renders, like they were still popping up relatively recently. They've started to actually go back and update them a little bit. Like they've added like proper rendered fur or the new style of rendered fur on a lot of these. Yeah,
this is something you see with the Mario cast too. Well, they will update a render with what is like clearly like a new model or like new lighting or both, but the pose is exactly the same. That portrays like, oh, it's the same rig.
Yeah,
and they just use this pose because it's very useful as a generic promo image.
Right. So, a lot of the poses of this era you'll still see, but they're like, what? Why does that render look different and better than I remember it? Well, it's because they updated it. But yeah, this is kind of I would say that this pre-returns era is sort of where Diddy more or less has become locked in. But they have, of course, improved it with time, and there have been variations. And I would say that the retro Diddy, starting with Donkey Kong Country Returns, you could count this as a new design, given that, like, most prominently, he's got something that's only been in the retro games. Right? But it's such a iconic part of the retro games that it's almost like an augmentation of Diddy's design in full. It's his backpack that he's got in the retro games.
Honestly, genuinely surprised after Returns that this like didn't just become a permanent part of his design.
Really? Yeah.
I'm okay that it didn't, but it's like such a radical thing to just establish in a game. Like, yeah, Diddy has a backpack, and he will be required to have a backpack for his entire appearance in this game for the mechanic we've attached to him to work.
Yeah,
and then it's back in Tropical Freeze, but nothing in between.
It is weird. It is weird because when they added this to him in Returns, I just thought this is going to be a part of Diddy's design from now on. The problem is that the whole reason it exists is to give a visual logic without drawing too much attention to the fact that he uses a jetpack in the retro games, which of course,
right,
he first had in Donkey Kong 64 as a special move, but then Smash Brothers Brawl introduced the jetpack, and it became such a part of Diddy's identity, again, the Kingmaker, that Retro decided to include it as basically their own take on Dixie's like hair wafting as kind of a floaty ability. So,
and the difference in making a Donkey Kong Country versus making a Smash Brothers is you can't just take for granted a jetpack materializing out of nowhere on Diddy's back as needed.
Right. So I think this was a good
construct a logical reason for it to be there.
I think this was a good middle ground, having like a backpack that houses it. And I do like the idea of Diddy having a backpack. It's a very, like, adventuring sort of thing to have. I mean, obviously, Diddy's friend Banjo doesn't leave home without it.
And I guess we should also mention it's like the jetpack in DK64 and Smash is like what you would expect a jetpack built by Funky to look like, and that is like a big wooden box with barrels coming off of it.
Yeah.
This backpack, whenever the jetpack part of it is not deployed, just looks like a schoolboy knapsack.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, I think my only issue with it is just the color scheme. Just, it's like this grayish tan beige backpack. I don't even...
It is very featureless to the point I have a difficult time, like, digging up any art highlighting just the backpack. It is very understated, and I guess in a, like, you want that over something that looks obnoxious.
Yeah.
But it does just kind of feel like a very, like, generic, like, kids camping backpack.
I realize I've never seen this backpack, like, fully detailed from behind. And
yeah, I think I've only ever really noticed it from behind in-game. I'm sure there's, like, incidental views of the back from the pre-rendered cutscenes and returns, but, like, right. I haven't really internalized them.
Yeah, it's a shame that Retro doesn't have, like, the amount of ass shots that Rare would specialize in their promotional renders, because that's really how I learned what these characters look like from front and back. Alas. This is also, the fur is a little bit better in Returns. It's not to the point it would get at, but there's clearly more of an effort to really highlight the rendered fur. For Diddy, I mean, obviously Jungle Beat had the blow-dried sort of absurd fur, and Diddy wasn't in Jungle Beat, so we didn't really see it there. I guess Diddy Kong Racing DS was the closest we came to that, but in a mainline Donkey Kong game, this is the return of Diddy Kong having rendered fur.
And it's a pretty good effort at fur, too. It's a lot, like, denser than I think any attempt to give him fur has come before. It's, like, a very fine, short hair, but, like, in much greater quantities all over him. It, like, follows naturally. But it is just, like, we're jumping ahead again, but it's hard not to just remember, oh, yeah, a game would come along, like, barely a few years later and run laps around this.
Yeah. Also, his skin. I've never noticed Diddy's skin texture on the renders in Returns, but you can actually see the detail in his skin. It's not
it's very subtle.
Yeah, it's very subtle, but there's clear, like, slight pigmentation differences. It looks like an actual living creature's skin, and it's not just this, like, same shade of tan or beige or whatever.
Yeah, you can really tell that this Diddy is bespoke for Returns, and I don't think they really use him for anything outside of it.
No.
Maybe owing to it being from Retro, maybe owing to the backpack, but no, it's just locked to this one game and its ports.
Yeah, because between Returns and Tropical Freeze, Diddy really didn't show up in a whole lot. And, like, Mario Sports Mix has a render of Diddy that's kind of unique. But it, like, doesn't have necessarily the hallmarks of the Returns design. Like, obviously the backpack is
this
there.
is it looks more like the late buyout era render, but, like, made to be more in line with Jungle Beat Donkey Kong, because a Jungle Beat ish Donkey Kong was what was in that game.
Yeah. I have to say,
it just feels like a weird outlier to have that right after Returns.
It is an outlier, but I have to say, as far as, like, trying to do a Jungle Beat version of Diddy, I like the way this looks more than Diddy Kong Racing DS.
Oh, absolutely. Like a much, much, much stronger attempt at it, and I feel like it preserves... It feels like gives priority to preserving Diddy's identity more than it does fitting in with Jungle Beat.
Yeah, for sure. It's just weird. It's weird to say, like, yeah, I like Mario Sports Mix Diddy more than Rare's final go at doing a Diddy Kong design. It seems like it's sacrilegious coming from me, but it's the truth. Just compare them for yourself.
It just looks better.
Yeah. So that brings us to Tropical Freeze, the last mainline Donkey Kong game, if you're not counting Donkey Kong Adventure, which Diddy Kong was not in. But this isn't really a new design per se. It's basically just Retro getting really good at bringing their first Diddy Kong design up to a new standard. So we'll call this Diddy version 7.5. I don't know. I've lost track of the versions at this point, but this is where Retro gets really, really, really good at doing fur.
Yeah. I remember when this artwork first surfaced online, like not just Diddy, but like the entire cast for Tropical Freeze, and just being absolutely blown away by like the level of quality we had reached after it felt like we were kind of stuck in the doldrums for a while.
I remember thinking, finally, it feels like not only has Nintendo and the companies working with Nintendo, studios working with them, not only have they finally caught up to where Rare was with rendered fur, but they finally surpassed where Rare was. Because it is just this huge leap forward. And, you know, obviously Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze was the first Donkey Kong Country game in HD. But just the promotional renders, I mean, it's like, pow! Holy shit.
Yeah, this finally feels like bereft of compromise.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. And also, it's got the Smash Brothers style, like, seams in the clothing. And you can see, like, the fabric, the textiles. You like, even in his, like, the straps on his backpack and the flap on the back, like, you can make all of that out. And it's, like, the stars on his shirt, you can almost see where they're printed on there. It's phenomenal. Then the more you look at it, the more you realize that there are details you never even really appreciated at the time.
It really was just, it felt like a huge leap. Even, and again, just in such a short amount of time, relatively speaking.
Yeah, we talked about the massive leaps that, like, Rare took back in the 90s, but it feels like technology moved faster back then. Like, we've hit this kind of plateau with video game graphics and computer renders where it does feel like everything just kind of stagnated for a bit. But so going from 2010 to early 2014, I mean 2013 when this render first surfaced, 3 years, it's just like, wow, that's a big jump.
And it's funny that like, I know our listeners can't see it, but just if you look up Tropical Freeze Diddy, this is the render you're gonna get. As mega detailed as this render is, I think more than any other render, it highlights just how soft the detail has become on Diddy's ear over time, because it is just like pottery clay in this render. in a good way. I think it's like good that they stylized it so heavily to this degree.
To me, it looks like those things in stores that used to exist where you could, like, drop coins in and watch the coins, like, spiral down into the abyss. Like, oh, donate a coin to charity and have fun watching it go down the vacuum. But yeah, I don't know. The ear is distractingly smooth now that you pointed it out to me, Cameron. Damn it, I can't unsee that. But everything else I really, really think is really hyper detailed, except, like, he doesn't have toenails and fingernails.
About that. Should we move on to the next render?
Yeah, it's like going from night and day. Like, wow, I really like this render. And then we go to Smash 4, which...
It's so weird to be disappointed in a Smash Brothers Diddy.
It is. It really is.
How
especially
good Brawl was.
Brawl might be my favorite Diddy ever. Smash 4 was the same year the Tropical Freeze came out. And in all aspects, it's this wild, wild downgrade. Even to the shape of his face feels wrong.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the mouth in this render. And like, should be said, like, as much as I'm like poo-pooing on this render, this isn't like me. This is not a case of like Mario Kart 8 where I have like a persecution complex of why does Donkey Kong look like so rough and everybody else looks amazing. Most characters look a little bit off in Smash 4. I feel like it has a weird, like in particular, I feel like it has a weird tendency to like for skin to look wrong and like kind of rubbery. Like you really see it on its Ganondorf.
Mm-hmm.
Or like just like colors to be kind of weird where like some stuff is weirdly pale, some stuff is blown out. So like I don't feel like Diddy looks like notably worse compared to any other character, but this is just kind of a weak showing for him. Even the fur I don't like as much as what they did in Brawl, even though I think like technically there's more going on. I feel like it's doing a lot less with a lot more. I'm not as buying into the illusion of it.
Yeah, I don't know. Like the skin just feels like it's, I don't know, like it was almost like pasted on. It doesn't.
It's very vinyl-y, like
yeah,
like vinyl, like toy texture to me.
But like it also like melted in the sun a little bit.
And I guess since we alluded to it, we should mention the big like deviation this time in Diddy's design is that he has visible fingernails and toenails. I
do like that. That for me personally, I like that little detail because it's a subtle thing. But it is kind of weird looking at the Tropical Freeze rendered, which is pretty great. But then you realize, I don't know.
It's a detail I could take or leave. I will say it does not look gross on this, which is what you don't want. You don't want it to look like a like that sort of like SpongeBob or Ren and Stimpy like zoom in of detail where it looks horrifying. I think it's like just stylized enough, but it also looks as good as the rest of the render does, which is not spectacular.
Yeah, I feel bad for constantly like wagging my fingernails at Smash 4 because I feel like I'm very harsh on it for reasons that are fair and reasons that are not fair. Because obviously the Smash ballot, the way it was presented to us, and then just like the huge movement, the Croc the Vote movement, and like then it felt like we failed, but we didn't really fail, but we didn't know it at the time, and there was just a lot. It was like
even divorced from the like politics of like did our boys get in?
Yeah,
and like. Isn't it weird that it kind of just ignores Tropical Freeze happening more than it should? A lot of it is just... I think a lot of Smash 4 is just weird, and a lot of it is owing to its, like, not ideal development circumstances, which it's...
Yeah.
It's split into 2 games, and both versions suffer from needing to justify the existence of the other.
Right.
And also one of them being on the Wii U.
Yeah, to the end, period. Yeah, like I don't really have many good memories from that whole period. It almost feels like this epilogue, like this one last bout of angst before the buyout era is completely worked out of DK Vine's system. I was a petulant brat during Smash 4, like that whole cycle, and like that was like I got it out of my system finally. Like, all right, you know what? I'm Mr. Positivity from this point on. But that was like the last gasp of the old bitchy Hyle from the 2000s era DK Vine.
Yeah, and I guess another reason that 4 has a lot of 4, even though a lot of it did not come back in the next game, it just feels immediately memory hold by virtue of so much of Ultimate feeling like, okay, this is take 2.
It really was like Sakurai and team basically saying, "Oh, sorry about that. We got some sleep. We rested up. Here's what we meant to do." Boom, and it's like immediately like the vibes of Smash Ultimate, where it was like night and day. And I just recently talked about this. You know, E3 2018. I was out there with Mitchell that year, and I was very like, I'm not looking forward to repeating the drama of Smash. I was very much like, this is, no, like we just went through this and I feel bruised and battered and bloody. The wounds have not healed. I don't want to be put through this psychic turmoil of Smash again. Like Smash 4 was like all of the drama of Smash Brawl magnified to an umpteenth degree. And then really walking away with an empty hand. Like, not even just like no K Rool, but no Tropical Freeze stuff. Like you said, it was just like, Smash 4 really felt like all of the tropes about Smash, like, oh, just Fire Emblem characters. It was just it really was just, it wasn't for me. Might have been for some people, but for me, it just like everything I was looking to get out of it for my own fandom, from what I really just enjoy in Smash Brothers in general, just wasn't there. Smash Ultimate, that reveal, E3 2018, every single previous character is there. I was like, okay, sold. I don't care. I don't care if K. Rool's not going to be in it. Like, just having every past character, that immediately rectifies the flaws.
It started the game's like run-up period with such an act of good faith.
And then actually having the like, extreme fortune of getting to play it on the E3 show floor and then realizing, wow, I really like the way this game feels. I really like how it controls. This feels like Melee a little bit, but with like the tweaks and augmentations of Brawl. And yeah, I'm on board with this. And then a month later, August 8th, K. Rool, and it's just like, what is happening? And then, of course, E3 2019, Banjo and Kazooie, we were all there, watch our reaction video. But it was, yeah, like Smash Ultimate was such a positive experience, like nothing but good vibes, man. Just like, a lovin'. It was like the summer of 67, right? Like, it was just like, oh wow, this is what my boomer parents felt during the summer of love. Smash Ultimate was our summer of love. But all of that being said, the model of Diddy, while not approaching the greatness of Brawl's model, such an improvement.
Again, like, feels like a total second draft of Smash 4 Diddy.
Yeah.
Just better in every conceivable way. All the fur looks great now.
It looks so good.
Like all the like textures feel a lot more real and less plasticky. The lighting looks like softer.
His head is the proper
color
shape.
palette's a little bit more subdued, but in a way that feels more real, without looking like it was just completely soul sucked. I look at every time I look at like Ultimate DK and Ultimate Diddy, I wish like that was what the amiibos look like.
I know. I look at my King K. Rool and Banjo and Kazooie amiibo, and I compare them to Donkey and Diddy. Donkey's okay. Like Donkey's okay, but
DK's all right. And the like that, I like the Ultimate render more, even though it has a toothy grin. Should like show you how like bad I felt about Smash 4's renders.
Yeah. But yeah, this Diddy looks great. honestly, Cameron, like, as much as I like the tropical freeze render of Diddy and I like all the little detailing, which I feel like the tropical freeze render actually has more detail than Smash Ultimate. It's like retro beat Sakurai and team at their own game. But, like,
that's the thing with the Donkey Kong series, like, its whole shtick is so similar to Smash Brothers' own that, like, how do you top it without just getting, like, gross with the detail?
Which, now I really want to see the Ren and Stimpy SpongeBob style of gross close-ups. Maybe not for Donkey Kong, but, like, that would work for Conker, maybe? Like, we always talk about how you could bring Conker back, and I'm like, it's funny, because I would have nightmares, not about, like, the gross close-ups, but, like, my nightmare style in my childhood would be, like, those weird visual close-ups of things. And so when I saw it in Ren and Stimpy, I was like, whoa, that's what I dream about. So yeah, now I'm, like, really invested in this idea of getting, like, seeing the oily pores of the Kongs or their friends.
An interesting thing I noticed about the Nintendo logo and the stars on this Smash Ultimate model, just thinking about like the hat texture on this and shirt texture on this are really, really detailed.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking about how Mario renders have kind of looked since Odyssey, and they've kind of leaned into this idea that the M on Mario's hat is embroidered. Like, renders exist where you can just see individual stitching.
Yeah.
The Nintendo logo and stars on Diddy's clothing look like they are screen printed on.
Sure.
Like, there's not individual threads, but, like, that fits the kind of clothing they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
just like you can get a DK Vine's merchandise store at dkvine.com/merchandise. And here's the thing. They're printed, but they're durable. It won't come off in the wash. They're amazing shirts. Check them out. But yeah, the thing I like about the Smash Ultimate Diddy, also, like, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit about the ears. I like having a little bit more detail in the ears, so I feel like this is a nice middle ground. The Ultimate render compared to the smoothness of the Tropical Freeze.
I do think it looks a little bit better than the Tropical Freeze here.
But
because it's still stylized without, like, leaning in too much of the detail.
The nails on the fingers and toes, you see a little bit of white on the tips, compared to just the existence of the nail before. So I don't think they're too distracting, but they're there if you look for them.
It's a detail I'm still not used to seeing on Diddy and DK, so it's a little bit weird. But like as you said, you can just forget they're there most of the time.
Yeah. It really makes me want to, like, I don't know, like, trim them. Like, I want to see Diddy just breaking out the clippers, or maybe he's a biter, because he seems like the type anxious millennial, right? Like, biting his nails. Anyway, that takes us to, I guess, the present day Diddy, for lack of a better term, current Diddy, which is not necessarily tied to a game.
Yeah, that makes this one hard to classify, because I think up until the booster course pass, like, this is a Diddy that, like, solely existed in the realm of, like, non-game promotional material.
Yeah.
Largely. Like, maybe a Mario game here and there, but not really strongly.
It's like, oh, we need to have more up-to-date Diddy Kong renders.
This is the Diddy you use that fits in with the new Mario models.
Yeah, so they redid the fur on a lot of late buyout era renders, basically. And this is the Diddy you're seeing in things like the promotion for the Donkey Kong Country theme park. This kind of model Diddy shows up. It's more or less the same, just with better fur.
Yeah. It's like, ultimately, when a new Donkey Kong game comes out, I want it to still do its own thing and carve out its own identity, but, like, this is a totally, like, serviceable representation of Diddy for any general purpose in the meantime. It looks great.
It's better than reusing wildly outdated renders.
Yeah, importantly, it's not from 2005.
Yes, I'm looking at the recent Donkey Kong line of figures from Jack Specific, which I mean it's a very like small line. It's a reissue
Just DK and Diddy.
Well, yeah, and a reissue of the hideous toothy grin Donkey Kong from the World of Nintendo line, which they've now reclassified as Deluxe Donkey Kong. But the boxes like are this weird pastiche, this mishmash of like retro era jungles with the jungle beat render of Donkey Kong where he's like he's got his like hands behind his head and he's like, I don't know, it's like porn star posing Donkey Kong. And it's just like, what are you doing with this render? This old ancient render.
I will say it's made it easier to buy Jack Specific toys and immediately throw away the box.
You don't feel bad about not keeping those middle card, I'll tell you what.
Right.
So that brings us up to the current day, but I do feel like we need to address a couple of errant Diddy designs. Diddy designs that were kind of for special occasions. And two of them are from the Rare era, but one of them is close to my heart. And it is the yellow clothed Diddy from originally the 2-player contest mode in Donkey Kong Country, but he was also reused, I guess more canonically, in the hero mode from Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Advance. And it's even called out by Cranky Kong in the game's dialogue where he says, "You will need more than that flashy new costume to get you through this time." It's the solo Diddy mode in the Game Boy Advance version. But I love the yellow shirt, yellow hat Diddy, and I might be like in lonely company there to say that. But here's the thing, like in Smash Brothers as an alternate clothing, because they add the stars, they like invert the colors so the stars are red and he's got the yellow. I don't like it in Smash Brothers. I just like it when it's just the yellow, the basic yellow. And I don't know what it is about it, but it works for me. Maybe it's just the novelty of it. Maybe I would really hate it if he wore this more often than he did. But yeah, I have a weird affinity for this one, Cameron, and I don't really know why, other than yellow is my favorite color. And partially because of Donkey Kong, partially because Donkey Kong Land came in a yellow cartridge, Donkey Kong 64 came in a yellow cartridge. I don't know. I like bananas.
I think it's also just fun that this is acknowledged in universe as a wardrobe change.
Yeah. I like when cartoon characters are acknowledged to have more than the same set of clothes, even if it's just the sight gag of they have the same like clothes like 5 times over, like Donkey Kong having like multiple versions of the same tie. It's a very basic gag, but it's one I appreciate, that they're not just stewing in their own sweaty clothes day in and day out. I'm a very hygienic person. I don't like the idea of like I have to take a shower every day, right? Sometimes more than once, because I just can't with oily skin and oily hair. I'm just like, no, gotta be clean. And so it's nice to know that Diddy cycles through his clothes. But yeah, they did acknowledge it in universe, which is more than they did for the 2-player contest Diddy in Donkey Kong Country 2, which is where he had the purple tank top and purple hat.
And in fairness, how do you reconcile 2-player contest mode?
Josh Wallen, the Geek Critique, has some theories, and he wants me to do an episode about it at some point. And I'm like, eventually, Josh, eventually. But
the funny thing about this Diddy, who is kind of like clad in like this like bluish purple, like maybe an indigo.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I just always remember him for is not these blue clothes. Because the thing is, the way that this look for Diddy is achieved in-game is that they just swap the red in his color palette for his sprites to this purple. Which also means that anytime the inside of Diddy's mouth is shown, like when he screams during the pre-boss fights, the inside of his mouth is also purple, like he just ate a grape popsicle.
Yeah. I remember thinking this in like 95 when, you just try out 2-player contests, even if you don't stick with it. It's just like, I want to see what this does. And seeing the purple mouth and thinking like, yeah, he must have like been eating some candy or something that just stained his mouth. And
it's the 90s. That was a popular thing.
Yeah, like, oh wow, this fruit by the foot will give you tongue tattoos. Or maybe it was Fruit Roll-Ups that did that. Fruit by the foot maybe didn't, but yeah, it was.
Like it's turning the milk blue.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, we got to the late 90s and the aughts, and it was like, purple ketchup. What? Anyway, love Hero Mode Diddy Kong. Would love to have that option again in a game. The most recent deviation, because we could talk about the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, right? But that was just basically game Diddy through a different prism. There wasn't a lot like he looked like a duck part of the time, but
yeah, I feel like this next design normally would be like kind of beyond the purview of this feature. It's just so significant and high profile. We got to talk about it.
We have to talk about this because it's significant. Yes, it's the Super Mario Brothers movie quick cameo appearance by Diddy, who was, of course, famously seated with Dixie and Chunky Kong, which is the bewildering one of the bunch. I don't know which is.
It's a good pairing.
Yes, it makes sense.
I've made this comparison before, but I kind of like this, like, reframing of the dynamic of like Chunky as the like Joseph Gribble of the like younger Kongs. Or he's just the like one who hit puberty first and is bigger than everybody else, but is their buddy.
It works with my fan, and the Chunky is a monkey. This is all the Monkey Kong sitting together, right? Minus Tiny, who is excluded, but we got Swanky in the movie, which is still amazing. But yeah, so I'm really fascinated by the redesigns of these three Kongs in particular, because Chunky is more or less pretty, like, accurate. They reinterpreted Chunky's look from Donkey Kong 64 to fit the look of the movie. And we're not here to talk about Chunky, right? But
right.
Diddy and Dixie...
like, I feel like it's hard not to talk about the other Kongs because I feel like they all kind of inform what Diddy and Dixie ended up looking like.
Right. So Chunky is more or less faithful. With some, like, they gave him did they give him jorts?
He is wearing shorts.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see if they did the whole, like, the back of his vest having a different texture from the front because we don't see him from the back.
Right.
But, I don't object to Chunky having jorts. I think that's fine.
They also gave him scruff on his face.
Because also he's always had the belt, and it's not holding up anything if he doesn't have pants.
Kong's his clothing is optional, so it's all just an accessory anyway, right? Donkey Kong doesn't need to wear a necktie. It's not like he's going into the office. It's just part of their personality. And Chunky's like, I'm the guy with the belt.
He's going to sit in front of his cave all day.
But yeah, one of the absurd details you can see on Chunky is he's got, you mentioned Joseph Gribble. That's kind of apt because, yeah, he's kind of got the puberty scruff on his face, which it's a lovely detail, I guess.
It's hard not to dwell on Funky. I love this reframing of him as like in like on the level of friend with Diddy and Dixie.
Well, yeah,
Like they can just like he hangs out with them. It's not just like they know each other through Donkey Kong.
right. Well, Chunky is canonically Dixie's cousin, so some familiar
Yeah.
relationship there. But yeah, Diddy and Dixie.
We haven't seen Kitty in a while, and he's also her cousin.
There were theories that Kitty was in the Rainbow Road sequence, which is, I think, can arguably
I think it's
disputed.
just that there are generic Kongs that look like him.
Right.
I feel
right.
like if it was intended to be Kitty, we would have seen a close-up scene of him like we do with Chunky and Swanky.
Right. It's the same thing with Funky. I know Saturday Night Live said this is Funky in the Rainbow Road sequence, but I think they just got that from DK Vine's early reporting. Sorry about that, Keenan. But the look of Diddy and Dixie inform each other, as you said. And it is they've always kind of informed each other, going back to the Nintendo logo on Diddy's hat and the rare pin on Dixie's beret. But they've never actually mirrored each other. For the criticism that Dixie is just like the Miss Pac-Man to Diddy's Pac-Man.
There's a lot of criticism that Dixie is just Diddy in different clothing, and spiritually, okay, I get what you're saying, but literally they aren't.
Yeah,
they're very different shapes.
As you said, all of the Gorilla
different aesthetics.
All of the Gorilla Kongs are built off of Donkey Kong. All of the Monkey Kongs are initially built off of Diddy Kong. That's the extent of it. But they did make Dixie different, both in attitude and visual design. But for this movie, they kind of unified their looks. There were some compromises made back and forth to, I guess, rethink their clothing, where they do match now, for better or for worse. For one thing, Diddy looks younger in this, which would make sense given I know the Super Mario Brothers movie isn't canon to the video games, but this would be before the events of a version of Donkey Kong Country, right? So this would be a younger Diddy who idolizes Donkey Kong, cheering him on from the stands. So he looks like he might be a year or two younger than we got to know him in Donkey Kong Country. And he's wearing what looks like a basketball jersey. It's rethinking the tank top. I said tank top instead of tank top. I was thinking about the tortoise from Bubblegloop Swamp, Cameron.
It is much, much baggier than his tank top in the games, and I think some of it is for parody with Dixie, who they also put in a tank top rather than her tied t-shirt, which I think is just that this makes sense for the movie and give the two more parody with each other. I also think Diddy and Dixie in general their designs are massaged in a similar way to how Donkey Kong's was, where I feel like with Donkey Kong, I feel like they kind of injected a bit more of the DK94 design back into him.
Yeah.
To make him fit more with the movie's version of Mario's world.
Yeah, for sure.
And blend the two sensibilities a little bit more.
It was almost like, and obviously this isn't the case, but it was almost like Miyamoto was like, haha, now's my chance. Kev Bayless, check this out. But obviously, it's for the movie and the movie's universe. It's not being informed in the games at all. The Donkey Kong Country theme park would reflect it if that was going to be the direction going forward. But yeah, the facial structure does match Donkey Kong 94.
Right.
It almost looks like a little bit like Junior looked in that game, ironically enough, right? Just the chubbiness of the cheeks.
Yeah, to that end, I think matching the rest of the movie is why we have choices Diddy's eyes are firmly split down the middle now in two separate shapes.
Yeah.
His mouth and nose shape are a little weird. They're not they're not 100% the same as Donkey Kong's, because Donkey Kong and Cranky have like more of a ridge split between their nostrils, but it's kind of like what you pointed out before with like the King of Swing arc, where there's just this like separate bridge in the middle now.
Yeah. I'm not opposed to that. I like it. It's almost like if you're gonna up the detail, like how do you keep upping the detail in Diddy without getting gross? I think like clearly showing that separation in the eyes is a legitimate thing you could do, and I'm fine that the movie did it. Honestly,
it's one of those things where like, similar to how like the live action Sonic movies do it, it's like a choice that, like, within the visual language of this film, I think it's a choice that works and I'm happy with it. Like, I don't know how I would feel about it happening in an actual Donkey Kong game, but I don't have to worry about that because this is its own thing and it can be its own thing.
right?
And I can evaluate it on those merits. And on those merits, I think this is a really cute looking CG monkey in a movie.
Going back to the clothing really quick. So, like, we're talking about, like, the more jersey-like appearance. Part of the reason it reads as a jersey to me is they added, like, an outline stitching of a yellow...
yellow trim around, like, all the arm and neck holes and the bottom.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is because it hangs lower, you actually see Diddy Kong's chest. The top of his chest rather than the bottom, his stomach hanging out.
Like, that was always logically there, but it does feel weird to see it.
Yeah, because normally we see the bottom of his like we see his stomach hanging out and his belly button, which he's always kind of had like a pot belly. And
yeah, I feel like they've like also like downplayed the like egg shape of his torso for this movie, which again makes sense. You need a movie character that can move realistically.
Yeah. And speaking of the clothing, the big change for the hat is he does not have a Nintendo logo on the hat, which I guess would not fit with the movie's universe, given
it makes sense. Mario has an NES in universe.
Yeah.
But since all the Kongs have been transposed to the Mushroom Kingdom, like, what is Nintendo to any of them? They wouldn't know what that is.
There's not that meta fourth wall level of we all know we're in a video game, because they're not in a video game. They're in a movie. So, you know, and you don't want to like put the Illumination logo on Diddy's hat, because who wants that? Like, so.
But a giant minion on his hat.
Yeah. Diddy's a really big Despicable Me fan in this universe. You don't want that. So they opted, and I think this was really more of what are we going to do with Dixie's beret? And then like Dixie's hat informed Diddy's hat, where, you know, it's been the biggest design quandary of Dixie, minus the lack of knee pads, is how do you replace the rare pin on Dixie's hat? And they just haven't done it.
Yeah, they just kind of avoided it, which has had the side effect of, I think Dixie's beret just looks really plain without something there, especially with Diddy having such a huge logo emblazoned across his hat. It just feels like a piece is missing. When none of their development partners have taken the step of like, let's put our logo on there.
Right, because of course, like,
maybe to keep this from happening again.
Right, because all you do is what Dixie's gonna have a pay-on logo, Dixie's gonna have a retro logo. Like at a certain point, it's just you're gonna have to keep updating it. So what they did was they gave Dixie, and we were debating for the longest time because we first saw Diddy, Dixie, and then Chunky when we got an expanded look at it. We first saw them in the Ring of Kong artwork in like the movie poster. Yeah. And it was very, very tiny. And we saw a little bit of yellow on Dixie's beret. And we're like, does she have the rare pin? And then we're like, it can't be the rare pin. I mean, I'm sure Rare would be cool with it, but Nintendo wouldn't want to be promoting.
I feel like it took until the like 4K Blu-ray to come out where we were like able to get a pretty good idea of what these pins on their hats are, because their scenes are just so short and fly by, and everybody's moving, and it's from a low angle, so it's hidden most of the time.
We like, there's a theory that it was a banana pin for a while, but which actually would be a good idea for the games. But what they went with, for better or for worse,
for a while I thought it was going to be a gold heart, like what she gives you in Tropical Freeze, which I thought would be a really clever idea.
Oh fuck! Yeah, you're right. Shit. They should do that in the games. Anyway.
Which I think they should do in the games, and I think I should have done it in this movie.
Yeah, so I'm not really... I really like the way...
Go ahead and...
I really like the way Dixie looks in the movie. I'm not wild about just giving her a version of, like, a more of, like, feminine-coded version of Diddy's, like, jersey, shirt, whatever. Like... she's got like a pink jersey or tank top.
And to be fair, these designs show up for all of like 3 seconds. If an actual Donkey Kong standalone feature film happens, I would not doubt that these designs get a second or third pass.
Sure. I just don't like I like Diddy and Dixie being linked, but I also want Dixie to have her own identity and voice, and not just be the, like, Miss version of Diddy Kong.
Yeah.
So...
I also get why they didn't just go with her game shirt.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't want them to be too similar.
Right.
But, like, for this short scene, I don't really have a problem with the shirts that either of them are wearing. So we've kind of been talking around it. What does replace the Nintendo logo on Diddy's hat and the rare pin on Dixie's is they seem to have matching round button pins that have the letters DD and DX, like in Tropical Freeze. And this is a choice I don't like, but it's not the movie's fault. Really.
I wasn't a fan.
The DD and DX barrels in within the context of Tropical Freeze, I don't really like those letters being used as iconography set in stone for those characters. Mostly because they just don't make sense as abbreviations
compared to DK, right? Yeah,
right.
It's...
like it's not a first name surname monogram. It's just phonetically adjacent to what their names are. And in Tropical Freeze, I accepted it because just you kind of have the unenviable task of having to communicate which Kong is in the barrel on screen.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to come up with something. And two of them are DK, so it doesn't work if you just make it DK.
Yeah, like you want to keep it accessible, so even just shifting the color wouldn't necessarily work for everyone. So I get it. I'm not a fan of that becoming their emblems or their defining insignias, because it's also like not consistent now, because in Mario Kart, Diddy's insignia was his stars, and Funky's was his, like, what Mario Kart established, I guess, is his corporate logo, which is just his big smiling face. And then Dixie was added to Mario Kart Tour, and they made her insignia the DX. And I'm like, but Diddy's is the...
Yeah, they don't really match anymore, and also it's... Like, I get they struggle to come up with iconography for Dixie for lack of the Rare logo to give her anything.
Yeah.
But I feel like there was a better solution. And I realize we're talking a lot about Dixie in this segment about Diddy Kong, but it's all feeding back into each other. I really kind of dislike the, like, digging their heels into these becoming standard iconography for the characters, because they just don't work for me.
Right. It's I mean, talking about the Attitude Era, DX does not mean Dixie Kong. So it's... Anyway, overall, I like the design of Diddy in the Super Mario Brothers movie. Just not that pin, but you can barely see it anyway. So I'm sure in a Donkey Kong movie or a Donkey Kong like spin-off series or whatever they do, they'll probably rethink that. But for that short scene, it is what it is and it works. All right, Cameron. Well, we do have a few calls to take. Now, I'm not sure how many of these calls are actually going to be about the design of Diddy throughout the years and how much of it is just going to be general Diddy chit chat. So we'll see. We'll talk about it. We're just in the mood like Diddy Kong. So we'll just play them and we'll have some discussions. And then I want to wrap up this episode after the calls by talking a little bit, because in previous episodes under this branding, we have talked not just about the design of the characters, but the design of the characters' world. So I want to, I guess, propose something. I want you to start thinking about this while we play the calls. What would be the look, the consistent look for a Diddy Kong game? Sans Donkey Kong, if we can agree upon any universal standard for that. So just something to think about, but we're going to take the calls. We got 5 of them to take. If you would like to call the DK Vine hotline, it's always open at 1-202-630-VINE. It's 8463. Give us a call, leave a message, keep it pithy if you can. They do cut off at 3 minutes, but you don't have to go the full 3 minutes, just keep them short, keep them snappy, and I'll try to play them if there's time. And if we don't get an abundance of them, we do save calls for callsack episodes later down the line. So something to keep in mind too, if you just want to talk about anything generally related to the DKU. All right, let's go ahead and play that first call.
Hey guys, Rick here. I just figured I'd call in and add to all the praise that Diddy Kong's been getting this episode. I was thinking about how cool and special it is that in the very next game in the series, Diddy Kong was the main character of, like Luigi, Tails, characters like that. They have their own games and their own series, but this is like if Luigi and Toad are your playable characters in Super Mario Bros. 3 or something like that. You should find a better example, but that's just so cool. It's clear that Rare had big plans for Diddy Kong, making Diddy Kong as important as Donkey Kong, even with just like the hero coins in DKC2, showing that Diddy Kong is better than Link and Yoshi and Mario. And of course you can't not mention Diddy Kong Racing, amazing game that went on to spawn other series. So, Diddy Kong's a great character, and it's clear that Rare, I would have loved to have seen what Rare would have done next with Diddy Kong. Cause they would have. What if there'd be more spin-off series, maybe another main series game? Who knows? But either way, it would be great if Diddy Kong could kind of branch out more like he used to. As of right now, he's just kind of still playing second fiddle to Donkey Kong. But either way, he's here to stay, and we all love him. We love him. All right, guys. Have a good one.
Well, thank you for the call, Rick. Yes, obviously, we're Diddy Kong partisans here at DK Vine. I don't think there's anybody on the DK Vine staff, past or present, that didn't hold Diddy in the highest regards. You hear these people saying Diddy Kong's an annoying character, and I'm just like, what the fuck are you talking about? I think you're projecting.
Yeah, what does he do that's annoying? Explain.
Right. Yeah. Like Tricky and Star Fox Adventures.
I'll hear you out, but tell me why.
Yeah, Tricky and Star Fox Adventures. Okay, I kind of understand if you have an aversion to characters interjecting Navi in Ocarina of Time. Like, I understand it, but also Tricky's not annoying. He's adorable. Shut up.
Right. I don't agree with you, but I see where you're coming from. With Diddy, I really don't.
And yeah, Rick, you're right, because like Diddy was Rare's baby. We associate characters like the Rare mascot. There is no Rare mascot, but when we think of Rare mascots, we usually think of Banjo and Kazooie, and we think of Conker. I think of Diddy by and large, because I think like Rare, like we were talking about earlier, Cameron, like Rare knew what they had with that design and with what they were conjuring up with and why they fought for Diddy Kong and ultimately opted for Diddy Kong to be a separate character and not be Donkey Kong Jr. And like the decision they made when Nintendo was like, you can use a Kong to headline our like Pro-Am 64, and they picked Diddy Kong because Diddy Kong was theirs. And you know, I do lament that Diddy doesn't really get to break out of Donkey Kong's shadow anymore. It's better than him just not being in games at all. But I do miss the time when you could, we saw a little taste of this for E3 2001, where, oh yeah, for no reason at all, here's Donkey Kong Racing, but then Diddy Kong Pilot. It's not Donkey Kong Pilot, it's Diddy Kong Pilot, but Donkey Kong's in it. He's just going to play second fiddle to Diddy because they can do that. They have that sort of relationship where, oh yeah, I'll take the back seat on this one, Diddy. You take the lead, whatever. It's like, whatever. Nintendo's going to hate this game anyway, so I don't want to take the heat for it.
Yeah, I've always like appreciated the for lack of a better word, like bravery of Donkey Kong Country 2 immediately ditching the title character and starting this arc where Diddy isn't just somebody Donkey Kong respects, but is like a standalone hero in his own right, and is like exactly on the level of his mentor, and kind of carrying that momentum, even if just by happenstance, into Diddy Kong Racing. And it feels like he's just kind of settled into like, okay, you're Donkey Kong sidekick again, which to the game's credits, I've never felt like Diddy's character development has just fully reverted in the way that like Luigi is permanently locked in like Mario's shadow for the sake of comedy. Even no matter how many solo games he gets where he like overcomes his fears and fully comes into his own and establishes that like he can hold his own as a hero. He's just because that characterization of him is fun.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever really going to go away. With Diddy, I kind of just feel like it's like, no, we both have mutual respect. I'm on your level, but also you can take point on this one, and like, well, we're gonna hang. I'm not too good for you now.
Yeah, I think that's the appeal of Diddy, is that when you're a kid, you know, we tend to root for the underdogs, right? And so Super Mario Brothers, there's just something about Luigi that you rooted for him. And maybe it was Super Mario Brothers 2 and he had the more fun jump, or maybe it was just you like the color green more. But there's something about Luigi that was just endearing to a lot of people, and you always wanted to see Luigi really break out from under Mario, and he never could. And then immediately with Diddy, it's like, yeah, here we go. 1 year later, Diddy is taking the lead and actually having to rescue Donkey Kong, which at the time, like, you didn't really see Mario. Like, Mario is missing, maybe, but you didn't see, like, Mario be the, for lack of a better term, or maybe to be, like, spicy, the damsel in distress.
I think Donkey Kong Country 2 in some way tricked me into getting Mario is missing.
Well, ouch. I rented it, and I was like, what? This isn't what I thought it was going to be.
The title does not communicate that it's an edutainment game. Details on the rest of the box do. But
yeah. So, yeah, like, it was just like Rare was on the wavelength. It's like, we know Diddy Kong's a really popular character. We're just gonna have, it was such a bold thing to do. And it really made Donkey Kong Country 2, like, not feel like just a cheap cash in to ride the success. It's like, we have something to say with this one. It's going to be a different experience. And yeah, like, I think, so here's what I'll say to just kind of surmise your call, Rick, and really put it into perspective. I do think you would have seen that continue going forward if the buyout had not occurred, if Nintendo had, say, purchased Rare, or they found some sort of, like, compromise going forward where you would maybe see some Diddy Kong helmed games. But I think that hard separation of there's not going to be any other Donkey Kong characters in this. It's going to be just Diddy out in his own. I don't think we would have ever seen that really again, because Diddy Kong Racing was kind of just a last minute fix because of the Banjo-Kazooie delay. And I think that had they, like, well, obviously it was a Rare published game, and you know, so they were maybe limited to what they could do. But I think, like, if they were setting out to make a Diddy Kong game from the outset, you would have had Dixie Kong in it, and you would have had, like, more elements. But we saw that with Diddy Kong Racing DS to an extent. But you would have seen Diddy Kong be more, like, on par with Donkey. But the downside, we very narrowly dodged a peanut bullet, because Double Dash was going to have Donkey Kong Jr. as Donkey Kong's partner, because there was still this sense that Diddy Kong is Rare's character. So if we're going to give a Donkey Kong a partner in these Mario games, it would be disrespectful to use Diddy Kong. We're going to bring in Donkey Kong Jr. We saw that with Mario Tennis, which was kind of a one-off anomaly, you know, whatever, time travel, plucked him from time. But that would have been the norm going forward, I'm sure. That would have been the standard. And then the continuity that Rare laid out would have probably been ignored at best by Nintendo and completely disregarded and retconned at worst. And yeah, you could say, well, Baby Mario's in these games, Baby Luigi, how's that any different? Well, it would just, it wouldn't be any different, but you know it would be perceived as different. And so I think having Diddy Kong be Donkey Kong's trusty partner in things like Mario Kart, in all these Mario sports games, and even to the extent where he's appearing, like, in artwork at airports in Japan, that would not be the case. And I think Diddy's overall stature might be diminished had the buyout not happened. Ironically, I feel like the buyout gave Diddy a bigger boost, even though he would have gotten more games potentially as a star under Rare.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, like, would I welcome Diddy Kong solo titles? Yes, absolutely, in a heartbeat. But I also realize we're in a reality now where it's pulling teeth for Donkey Kong to get regular releases.
Right.
Which I think is part of why, like, not all of, but part of the reason why I think a lot of us champion the idea of Diddy Kong Racing coming back so much, because it is a way to do a Diddy Kong solo game that justifies its own existence. Yep. Unfortunately, probably not enough when Mario Kart also exists, but I'd like to keep dreaming.
Diddy Kong Racing is also, like, still an IP Nintendo owns. You type, okay, so every Monday I talk about, like, getting my work week started. One of the things I do is I check out URLs. I snoop around and I'm seeing, are they doing anything new with any of the URLs they own? So every Monday I type in DiddyKongRacing.com just to see, on the off chance. And it just redirects to Nintendo of America's website. But I'm like, one day they're going to surprise me. But they still renew that URL every year. So Anyway, thank you for the call, Rick. All right, let's go ahead and play our second call.
Hey, this is Kyle. I've been a fan of Diddy Kong for quite a while. I think I first encountered him in Mario Kart Wii when I unlocked him, 15 years ago at this point. And I've always enjoyed monkeys, and we'll start on a monkey with a jetpack. Since I was a bit late becoming a DK fan per se, I mainly enjoyed him from Mario spin-offs, and he always has fun interactions in that. Though I will admit, for a few years I thought he was meant to be just Donkey Kong Jr. redesigned. Unknowingly, that was the original plan. So how that works out. Now I have two questions for you guys regarding Diddy. One, if you were to give Diddy Kong his own game, how would you do it? And to make it tricky, let's assume Diddy Kong Racing 2 is off the table, like you can't go down that well. Maybe you can bring back Crunch, but none of the other characters. As for the second question, my second question is, God, I can't believe I'm forgetting what I was going to ask. The second question is, oh yeah, I remember now. How exactly do you make the timeline work with Diddy Kong? I have trouble. You guys use real years, which really confuses me. I guess the Olympics might have forced your hand, but I have a hard time justifying how Cranky was a prime ape, get it? But 13 years later, he's a decrepit old man, while Diddy's still young and spry after 30 years. Got any ideas? I'd love to hear your more explanation, like the golfing singers you did. Have fun. Goodbye.
Thank you for the call, Kyle. So I think really quick, because we kind of already addressed this. Yeah, maybe Diddy Kong Racing 2, as we know it, like Timber, Pipsy, Tip Top, Bumper, Drumstick, TT. Yeah, they wouldn't be coming along for the ride. Whenever we have daydreamed about a Diddy Kong Racing 2, it has been Diddy Kong with maybe a new cast of characters. The infamous Kevin Callahan bullshit from yore suggested.
Or even just pulling in obscure guest Nintendo characters, or honestly some of the DK characters that don't get a lot of play, like Crunch.
Yeah, the Kevin Callahan bullshit from back in the day even suggested that, what Dylan from, Dylan the Armadillo.
Rolling Western.
Yeah. So, I was like, oh yeah, that's actually a cool idea. That's a cool idea. I would also be fine with completely new characters, just go the Diddy Kong Racing route again. It's here's this whole new cast. Here, Diddy's going to a different island, and here's all, a new cast of characters who we could daydream for years on end that they'll get spin-offs that they'll never get. I'd be fine with that. I think Diddy Kong Racing is a valuable IP, and I think if it gets back in the public mind for Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pack, I think maybe there will be some new fervor for it again. They're sitting on money, and it's different than Mario Kart. You could do different things than Mario Kart. Yeah, I would miss Timber and crew, but I think just having the novelty of Diddy Kong Racing from a different studio would be pretty cool. And honestly, they would probably have Dixie in it. They would probably have Tiny in it. You could use characters like Chunky, Lanky, characters that there's not a lot of room for in a mainline Donkey Kong game these days.
Or a Mario Kart, for that matter.
Or a Mario Kart, yeah. So I think what's important with the Diddy Kong Racing is you want it a little bit removed from Donkey Kong, right? So as much as I like the idea of Donkey Kong's in it, but it's Diddy Kong Racing, maybe just let Donkey Kong be in his treehouse for this one. He doesn't need to come along. I think, one thing I really did like about Diddy Kong Racing DS, as much as I miss Banjo and Conker, is I liked that it was Dixie and Tiny. It was his girlfriend and his girlfriend's sister. It made sense for those to be the Kongs that would come along.
It was always honestly kind of weird to me in Diddy Kong Racing that he doesn't tell Dixie about it.
Yeah. It's one of the conceits. Again, I think if Rare had more time and
right, if Diddy being the star was part of the idea from the beginning, Dixie probably would have been there.
Yeah, I agree. So, and Tiny wasn't invented yet. So, but other than that, like I don't want to get greedy with it. Like, you could say, like, let's replicate the magic of Donkey Kong Country 2 and have Diddy versus Pirates. But I feel like that was kind of lightning in a bottle. I feel like doing any retread of that will just feel like it's watered down. It's like trying to recapture the magic. And there's just no way to do that again.
Yeah.
That wouldn't feel disappointing.
I feel like any other like genre I could suggest for a Diddy Kong game would just be me secretly wanting that for a Donkey Kong game in general.
Right.
Like the much talked about, like, oh, I could give Diddy Kong an RPG, but I don't really want that because it's intrinsically suited to Diddy. I want it because I want a Donkey Kong universe RPG.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I feel like, Diddy Kong Racing as the IP, as the, like, identity, so much of it is tied up in Rare, but I'm also completely fine doing something different and just reviving the IP. That was the dream under the Kevin Callahan rumor days, where I say rumor, like lies, let's be honest, lies, but
yeah, pretty safe to say I don't believe in Kevin Callahan anymore.
Yeah, I know. It's like, wow, okay. It's like slowly realizing that Santa Claus isn't an actual mythological figure that visits you at Christmas Eve. It's like, I don't know, maybe there was a Kevin Callahan, like the real Saint Nicholas. He's long dead. I know it's kind of contrary to your question there, Kyle, but for me it's Diddy Kong Racing. I'm a Diddy Kong Racing absolutist. Hell or high water, let's bring Diddy Kong Racing back. But to your second question, the age thing, well, obviously, okay, so we do use like real dates just because it's easy. Obviously, we're approaching, or we're already in a floating timeline for the Donkey Kong series, comic book time, right? The Olympics did actually tie us to real years. Fortunately, the Mario and Sonic at the Olympics series is now dead because the IOC wants to instead invest in things like NFTs. So they've canceled the contract with Sega. So we're not getting any more Mario and Sonic games. So, we no longer have that. But, okay, I'll say this. People used to age a lot more dramatically than they do nowadays. And so you're saying, well, how did Cranky go from like Donkey Kong Sr. in like 1981 through 83 to Cranky Kong in 1994? Well, have you seen how much older people used to look back in the day? Like, I could completely buy that Cranky was in his like maybe early 40s in the arcade series, and maybe he smoked a pack a day. And so 1994 comes along. Yeah, he's in his 50s, but he looks much older because people aged. Meanwhile, Diddy is a millennial. Diddy doesn't smoke. Diddy, takes care of himself and moisturizes.
Yeah. I'm surrounded by too many baby-faced, like, people reaching 40 to really scrutinize it that much.
Boom, right here, Cameron. I'm not like saying, look at me, look how young I look. Oh. But I don't look like I'm 40, not like the way 40 traditionally looked. I look like I'm a little baby. No. And so I know I'm just making Diddy my video game avatar, like my monkey persona, I guess. But I mean, it's true. I'm human Diddy Kong, all right? And so Diddy Kong is monkey me. And I'm not saying Diddy Kong is canonically 40, but I'm saying if you want to believe that, what's the problem? What's the harm in that? He's also a monkey, and he's not going to necessarily fill out any more than he already is. So, but yeah, I mean, we're probably going to approach a floating timeline. I'm not going to seriously sit here and suggest that the Kongs find the fountain of youth and preserve themselves. Although, that would make a great game. I'm just saying. Great MacGuffin in a Donkey Kong game if you want to give the bananas a rest. So, watch this space. I'll come up with something eventually. I feel like now that we're past the Olympic Games, maybe I can start having to seriously consider that, because it is getting a little bit ludicrous that the Kongs haven't aged since Tiny reached our teenage years. But, I'll worry about it when we get a new Donkey Kong game. How about that? Thank you for the call. All right, Cameron, let's take our third caller.
Hey guys, this is TJ, just calling you a few minutes before I gotta go into work, sitting in my car on a rainy day. Figured might as well stop and talk about some Diddy Kong. So yeah, Diddy Kong's anniversary is coming up. He's always been one of my favorite characters, just in fiction probably. I grew up with the Donkey Kong Country game from a very, very young age. Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong 64. I had the VHS copy of the Legend of the Crystal Coconut. I know the animated series, the quality there is kind of divisive for you guys. But yeah, growing up, I loved it. That was just my exposure to Donkey Kong in general. Those games, Diddy Kong Racing, the TV, those episodes of the TV show, they marketed it as a movie. And so as far as I knew growing up, those 3 episodes together were just a Donkey Kong movie. But yeah, Diddy Kong, just something about the little kid character. You really gravitate towards them when you actually are the little kid, when you are the target age. I was a big fan of Tails from Sonic at that age, characters like that. But, yeah, something about Diddy Kong's design, his energy, his youthful energy. Even though he's the designated sidekick, I never really lumped him with characters like Luigi, the kind of cowardly sidekick. Diddy Kong's always ready to, no matter how dangerous it is. I think of the Super Smash Bros. Brawl cutscenes. I think of a ton of other stuff he's been in, the Donkey Kong Country Returns cutscene. Diddy Kong's always ready to throw down. He's never cowardly. He's never hiding. Like, if Donkey Kong is there, Diddy Kong is there ready to stand right beside him. And I think you kind of miss that from a lot of sidekicks like him. But, yeah, I remember I'm pushing 30 right now. My mom and I were walking out of the Super Mario Brothers movie when it premiered, and I commented on how I was glad Diddy Kong got the cameo, and she said, yeah, you guys used to love that Diddy Kong character. And so, yeah, he definitely left his impression on me when I was growing up. And I had some stuff I wanted to say about Dixie Kong, but you know what? You guys will probably do this for her next year. I think I'll save my comments for that. So, yeah, big fan of Diddy Kong. He's great. Not much more to say. I know he's pretty divisive in the competitive Smash community, but not much you can do about that. I just think he's a great character. So, yeah, thanks for taking my call.
Well, thank you for the call, TJ. Well, this competitive Smash community, they don't really view things in the same way that, say, we do, right? Like, we're like, what about the soul of the character? I'm not talking about the spirits. I'm talking about the heart of the character. And they're like, well, this character's cheap because of the moves, or I don't know. But you brought up, like, Diddy in comparison to Luigi, and this came up before about him being not cowardly. I think actually, though, like, that's part of his character evolution, that his arc from Donkey Kong Country into Donkey Kong Country 2. Because originally, like, you look at those early renders of Diddy and the way he was portrayed in, like, the story of Donkey Kong Country, which we saw in an actual, like, cutscene in Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Advance, where Diddy was, like, nervous. I call him an anxious millennial. He was, like, trepidatious and unsure of himself in that original game. And it wasn't until, like, they got the Banana Horde back, and then Donkey Kong Land, if you want to factor that in, and then Donkey Kong Country 2, where he proved himself. He journeyed into the heart of darkness, Crocodile Isle, rescued his mentor, got all the hero coins, became a video game hero. I think that was the shift, where he was more sure of himself there. And we can, argue about intent, if that's the actual portrayal, but I think looking at Diddy Kong Racing, where he was, like, viewed as this big hero of the Rare Archipelago, to the point where Timber, like, called him up, like, we need help, we need the big damn hero, Diddy Kong. And then Donkey Kong 64, where he was a little bit more cocky, doing a little sway in the DK rap, and like I think, yeah, like he
kind of eating it a little bit when Dogadon showed up to
yeah
and was much bigger than he expected, which I think kind of goes into how I view Diddy Kong is that he gets scared, but I wouldn't call him a coward.
No, I think he definitely discovers his bravery. He discovers what he's capable of, and maybe he gets a little bit too sure of himself at times as a result. Like, if you go through the events of something like Donkey Kong Country 2 and you come out victorious on the other side, yeah, you're probably going to think, like, you're capable of anything, and then you run into things that maybe give you pause, like a giant dragonfly.
I fought a possessed sword, and that was the early part of my day.
Yeah, right? Yeah, the lava world was the second world. I'm telling you. But yeah, like, I really, like I said, Diddy's the heart of the Donkey Kong series, and I really think that's because it's his arc. Like, low-key at first, but, like, for the first 2/3 of the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, it is his story. And yeah, and then it's Dixie's story, and then, Donkey Kong 64 kind of gets weird with it, but, I think, like, that is the most consistent through line throughout the entirety of Rare's tenure with Donkey Kong is it's the Diddy Kong origin story, basically. And that's unique because it's not like Luigi where he's pigeonholed. Like, I know this wasn't the intention, but Rare just loved the character so much that they just wanted him to make good. And that's why I'm a fan of him, is I feel like I grew up alongside of him. And maybe he figured out his shit way before I did, but, it's something to aspire to, right? So, but yeah, thank you for the call, TJ. You're almost as old as Diddy Kong. At least as an IP. So, yeah. All right, let's take our fourth call.
Hi there, Hyle and Cameron, and everyone else at DK Vine. This is Jer Rare Bear calling in to talk about Diddy Kong, celebrating the 30th anniversary of his debut. It's exciting because I just replayed Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 recently. And I'm going to say, like, I wouldn't say that I'm, like, a Diddy Kong stan. Like, I liked the character, but I've always liked Donkey Kong more. And that's kind of funny because in a lot of hero sidekick pairings, I tend to like the sidekick character more. Like, I like Robin more than Batman, Tails more than Sonic, but for whatever reason, I've just always liked Donkey Kong more. And the more I think about it is, like, Diddy is kind of a vanilla character. Like, of the original DKC quartet of playable characters, he has the least gimmicks to him. Obviously the Tropical Freeze Kong Quintet, he's, has the least going on for him as a playable character. I mean, he has a little more than Donkey Kong, but still has the least. And then as far as Smash Bros. Ultimate goes, as far as DKU characters, he's the one I play the least. I like DK, King K. Rool, and Banjo-Kazooie more. But even though I'm not crazy about Diddy Kong, I still think he's a great character, and he's had really great development over the years. And, as far as, like, the golfing fingers things go, I think that's just because, Japanese design sensibilities, they don't like four-finger characters because it, like, is related to the Yakuza or something. And then I kind of like Diddy Kong having blue eyes, because then it's like DK has brown eyes, Diddy has blue eyes, and Dixie has green eyes. So, that to me is the trio. The core trio is the DK trio, is DK, Diddy, and Dixie. And anyway, yeah, excited to hear your thoughts, excited to celebrate this wonderful character, and I hope we can see him more in the future. Love you guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the call, Rare Jer Bear. Don't dismiss the golfing fingers just because there's a logical, real-world reason why they just changed his design. I'm just saying, like,
I guess bringing up the donkey with brown eyes, Diddy with blue eyes, Dixie with green eyes thing reminded me something I neglected to think about. Yeah, the blue eyes kind of lend themselves to this like inadvertent convention rare setup of male character with blue eyes and female character with green eyes, because we have it with both Banjo and Kazooie and Cooper and Amber.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And Fox and Crystal reverse it, but they didn't make Fox. So
what about Conker and Barry? I'm trying to think. Barry's a little bit wild because they dramatically changed her design from Pocket Tails to Bad Fur Day, but I can't remember their eye color off the top of my head. I haven't spent as long staring at renders of them as I have Diddy over the years.
A quick look up. Barry had green eyes in 12 Tails, and they shifted to blue for Bad Fur Day.
Okay. Well,
so they did meet that convention, but then later on it went away. Yeah.
So when I say I like Diddy, though, I should also say I really like Donkey Kong too. Obviously, I like Donkey Kong. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't like Donkey Kong. But for me, like, I call it the Reigle theorem. I credit it to Cameron here because it really did like always adhere to this throughout the buyout era. Donkey Kong as a character always worked best for me when he was paired with Diddy Kong, because if you remove Diddy Kong from the equation and you just had Donkey Kong by himself, and this is kind of mellowed out relatively recently, but in the heat of the buyout era, it was if Donkey Kong is by himself, there's a greater chance he's going to be portrayed as a jackass. Whereas when you put Diddy with him, then all of a sudden he's the mentor. He's the aspiring figure, the role model to Diddy.
Right.
And so Donkey Kong has to be portrayed in a heroic light. And so for me, Diddy is the element, the ingredient that makes me really like Donkey Kong.
Yeah, it is really hard to divorce the impact of having like an appealing kid character who looks up to Donkey Kong at a time when we were all in that age bracket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And honestly, part of why I gravitated toward Diddy in the first game is just that he ran faster than Donkey Kong.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it was like, when I played 2-player team, it was like, all right, I'll take the hit. I'll be the weaker character. And then I realized, oh, wait, I like how he maneuvers a lot better. He swims faster. I really like his cartwheel,
And he can still do everything except the hand slap that Donkey Kong can do. You just have to be more clever about it. Like, there's a crusher, get a barrel. There's a clump, You got a cartwheel.
I didn't mind being more evasive, So, yeah, like, I really like Donkey Kong, but I really like Donkey Kong, I think, by way of Diddy Kong, which is how I really became a Donkey Kong fan, Donkey Kong Country, and that dynamic between them. But, yeah, for Smash Ultimate, I will admit, Diddy is out of the quartet of DKU characters, like, not factoring in Star Fox, like, Donkey Kong, Diddy, King K. Rool, and Banjo and Kazooie. Diddy is the character I use the least because I find he's the least fun out of the four. Maybe he's on par with Banjo and Kazooie sometimes, but Donkey Kong, because he was the only character I really had in 64 and Melee, I got very good, or not very good, but I got better at Donkey Kong than I did with other characters. And King K. Rool is such a blast to play. Like, they really went above and beyond with King K. Rool and just being a total celebration of the character. And I really love his recovery and just, like, so I think I plays Donkey and King K. Rool the most, which betrays my status as number one Diddy stan.
Yeah, this is why, like, we can't make too much fuss over, like, people disliking Diddy because of like tiers in Smash or anything, because I'm with you. You put all those characters in a lineup, Diddy is probably my favorite one, at least in the trio of DK, Diddy, K. Rool. But I find him the most unwieldy to use as a playable character, so as much as I love him, I don't use him a whole lot. DK is usually my go-to just because a lot of his mechanics are very simple. I use Banjo and Kazooie a lot because I feel like they're the DLC character I intuit the most without having to like learn some kind of new mechanic that I struggle with.
Yeah.
And K. Rool, I just always like a heavy with projectiles, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah, K. Rool is, I think, the most fun character for me. Donkey Kong's the one I'm the most comfortable with. And Banjo and Kazooie I'm trying to get better at. And Diddy, I played him so much in Brawl, and I just felt like I never got the hang of him. But, I mean, I'm still glad he's there. And I still break him out. Like, I'm like, all right, let me give Diddy a whirl. Let me do some damage with Diddy. So, yeah, it is one of those things. I don't use him the most in Smash, but he is my Nintendo Switch profile icon. And I don't think I'll be changing that anytime soon. Maybe if they do Donkey Kong Country 2 and they add Dixie or Squitter.
Better Diddy.
But yeah, thank you for the call. All right, we have one more call to take, Cameron, and then we'll wrap this up with our final thoughts.
Hi, this is Max. I'm calling in about Diddy Kong. I'll keep this short. So first of all, Diddy Kong's first render ever, right? Donkey Kong Country 1 render. Especially the version that is like super saturated and has like, Diddy Kong has like violently pink flesh. It looks terrible. He looks like undead, like a ghoul. It's like he's slouching over. It's like this, it's like a reanimated corpse coming in my flesh, and I don't like it. Finally, some Diddy controversies. Here's my thoughts. Number one, Diddy Kong's eyes are black. They've always been black. It was so in the original Contra games, you know, he got a little bit famous. He thought that he needed to like improve his appearance for like Donkey Kong 64, Diddy Kong Racing. He put in those blue contact lenses, but once we got Contra Kings back again, he felt comfortable in his own skin, and he took those contacts off, and I would say good on him for like embracing his natural self. Also, Diddy Kong has 5 fingers. He's always had 5 fingers. Don't believe your lying eyes. Prosthetic golfing fingers aren't real. And if they were, and he had like full control over them, that would imply that he had like a brain chip to control this finger, and I don't want to think about that. I don't want those implications. That's it. That's Diddy Kong.
Ouch. I feel personally attacked.
Well, I mean, it's okay if you say prosthetic golfing fingers aren't real, because as Jeff Onan often says, Diddy Kong isn't even real.
It's like, what? Like, no, I don't want Diddy Kong to have an Elon Musk brain chip. We've lost enough good monkeys for that nonsense in real life. But, everyone's just taking me for prosthetic golfing figures. And I'm like, I'm just having a laugh. It's just good fun. You know, embrace the silliness, people. I'm going to make a shirt in our merchandise store that just says prosthetic golfing fingers. That's it. That's the shirt.
I thought you were going to make one that said embrace the silliness.
Embrace the silliness. It's weird though, because for the amount of labor I have spent crafting a retcon for the fingers and the toes. By the way, he wears prosthetic golfing toes too to improve his golf stance. I've never really addressed the eye change. I've just been like, it's whatever, the lighting.
I would just figure implicitly it's contact lenses.
Yeah.
If you have to feel the need to explain it.
I first got contact lenses in 1996. So if Diddy is my monkey counterpart, sure. He got contact lenses around the same time, and he went for the tinted ones. He got the blue, wore those for a while, and then shifted to the clear. You know, contact lenses evolved. By the time we got to the aughts, they had the more breathable kind that were less rigid. And so he went for the monthly disposable ones rather than the ones that you have to like clean. You have to put the like little pellets in your solution and clean them once a month. There was like a lot of upkeep for them. It was
high-speed racing without wearing a visor is probably a good way to get you to think about not wearing contacts.
And maybe, okay, I think if he has a natural eye color, it's probably brown, but under most lighting conditions, they appear black.
I at least like him to have a eye color so that the Kongs have consistent designs in regards to their eyes.
Right, yeah. But come on, people, like
even if it's just like gray outlines, at least give him the detail.
I agree. But come on, people, come on, my lovely Kongversation listeners, don't hate me for my fan wanks. For my fan retcons. I'm not saying you have to believe in the prosthetic golfing fingers. I'm saying the prosthetic golfing fingers is how I sleep at night. They're for my benefit. If you want to indulge, have at it. But I'm not forcing them upon anybody. Although it makes complete sense if you think about it. So anyway, all right. So, like I said, historically, in these episodes, we have also discussed the general artistic direction of the series. It's hard to do with Diddy Kong, given how married he is to the Donkey Kong IP and brand. And so my question as we wrap this up, and this kind of ties into a little bit of what the calls got into, is if there was a look for the Diddy Kong series, per se, how would you differentiate it from Donkey Kong? Because Donkey Kong Country 2 and Donkey Kong Land 2, like, they certainly had a different tone from Country 1 or Country 3, but I wouldn't say the aesthetic was wildly different. It was a different theme, but it was still Donkey Kong Country, right?
Yeah, I guess a way to make a Diddy Kong game more distinct from Donkey Kong is to lean back into the era that birthed him, get wild with the colors, make things a little bit more extreme.
So you're saying, like, play it loud, like, go back to the 90s. Yeah. You know what? That honestly would be clever to, like, if you were to give Diddy Kong his own game. It doesn't have to be Diddy Kong Racing. It could be Diddy Kong, plays Wordle. I don't know. But that's the game. That's the game. Diddy Kong plays Wordle, and it's just Diddy Kong sitting there on his phone playing Wordle. Go back to the Donkey Kong Country spirit of old and have it be like garish colors and like illegible font, and you just have fun with it.
Or even alternatively, like if like King of Swing was a one-off, and give Diddy a 2D game.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like Diddy Kong Racing, and again, this wasn't by design because Diddy Kong was shoehorned into one of the games he's most known for. It wasn't going to be his game. It was Timber's game, and then it was like, well, Timber doesn't move units during the holiday season. Bring in Diddy. And then Timber was going to get Star Fox Adventures or Dinosaur Planet or Dino Island. And then they were like, well, what if we just not use Timber? That's poor Timber. Anyway, Diddy Kong Racing wasn't going to be his game, but it was. It was ultimately. And it was a lot more cartoony, a lot more vibrant, a lot more like kid coded than the Donkey Kong Country series. La 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 la, and the Diddy laugh, and so you could go that direction, more overtly cartoony, eyes on haystacks and little bit more wild and loose. But the problem with that, though, is I feel like in turn, Diddy Kong Racing then influenced the ultimate direction of Donkey Kong 64, which then embraced that same cartoony aesthetic. Not to the same extent per se, but definitely like bringing in like more talking animals.
And at least like gave the Donkey Kong series a pass to do that sort of stuff.
Right. And like having more cartoony presentation and physics and like squishing effects. And so I feel like they had a chance to say, well, that's a Diddy Kong game. This is a Donkey Kong game. But they just immediately went, oh, okay, we can just get silly with it. And kind of stole Diddy's thunder. And then you look at what we would have gotten with Diddy Kong Pilot, and you're like, well, this doesn't look any substantially different than the other Donkey Kong games that it was announced with, Donkey Kong Racing or Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers. Like looking at some of the like leaked and data mine stuff from the leaked ROM from the 2001 build of Diddy Kong Pilot, at the very least. Like there would have been some wild swings in there. Like you had like these ghosts.
It does ultimately feel like Donkey Kong Racing and Diddy Kong Pilot were swinging the pendulum a bit back in the other direction, even if they were still pretty cartoony.
Yeah, like you look at some of the stuff in the build that of Diddy Kong Pilot that wasn't what became Banjo Pilot, like the build that had Redneck Kong once upon a time. It had like these ghosts that were very cartoony ghosts, like just like almost like cartoony characters in sheets, you know, but not like the Kremlin in a sheet from Donkey Kong 64 that just like played it up for laughs, like an actual ghost that's just like Halloween decor, right? And you had like these like cartoony chickens in there, and at one point K. Rool is going to like search for the lost city of El Dorado, and it's just I don't know, like I don't think there's enough to go on to say like this would have been a very clear direction for a Diddy Kong helmed game. And it becomes even muddier when Donkey Kong's in it and K. Rool's in it and Cranky's in it, and you know, we haven't seen enough from Donkey Kong Racing or what that direction would have been to really say for sure, oh, they were going in a different style for Diddy Kong Pilot. So, like, I think by the time the buyout, you can't really say, oh yeah, this is what a Diddy Kong game would be. But yeah, like going into the 90s extreme, X Games, Mountain Dew, kind of too cool for school, late grunge aesthetic for a Diddy Kong game, that would be perfectly valid. And honestly, I hate that I didn't think of it, because it's like whenever you or Jeff come up with a really good idea, I'm like, damn it, why am I so bad at this? So yeah, that's gonna be my answer too. I'm gonna glom onto yours. Like I'm just the tag along sidekick.
Like Diddy gloms onto Donkey Kong's back.
Right. Yeah, I have shrunken in stature because of the enormity of your brilliance, Cameron.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.